Catelyn Stark stood in the torchlit tent, her heart pounding so fiercely that she could hear the rush of blood in her ears. The smell of damp canvas and old hay drifted all around her, mingling with the scent of sweat from the men who were supposed to be guarding Jaime Lannister. Their eyes flicked toward her as she stepped forward, though none dared move an inch to block her path. She was Lady Catelyn, mother to the king in the north, and the anger etched upon her face was something they had never seen in her before. It was not the calm, measured tone of the woman who had so often kept her composure in the face of tragedy. Nor was it the quiet sorrow she had worn at news of her husband's death. This was something new, something unstoppable, burning in the core of her being. Word had just arrived that Lord Tywin Lannister's forces were on the move again. Even here in the wild Riverlands, she could almost feel his anger pressing toward them like a storm tide. But that alone would not have driven her to the place she stood now, not in the depths of the night with a drawn dagger at her side. She had come for Jaime Lannister, her captive, her bargaining chip, her greatest advantage against the Lannisters in King's Landing. Yet with each step she had taken through the darkness, she had known she was no longer thinking of trades and hostages. She was thinking of Ned. She was thinking of her daughters. Of everything that had been stolen. She found Jaime Lannister seated on a small stool in the center of the tent, ankles bound, wrists manacled behind his back. A fresh bruise lay purple across his cheek, courtesy of some scuffle with one of Robb's outriders who'd lacked the restraint to ignore a Lannister insult. Jaime still wore the battered remnants of his golden armor, though most of it had been stripped away for comfort's sake. His hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat and grime. Yet even in such disarray, he managed a mocking smile the instant he recognized her. "Lady Catelyn," he said, voice smooth despite his condition. "Come to see if I'm enjoying my accommodations? I must say, the hospitality has been lacking." Her jaw clenched. That voice reminded her of 1,000 swirling rumors, the Lannisters' betrayal, the brutality they had unleashed upon her homeland. It reminded her of Bran falling, of her own suspicions, of so much grief that she could hardly contain it in her chest. "I have come," she said stiffly, "to talk. Or perhaps not talk at all." He raised an eyebrow, though it hardly masked the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "That sounds ominous." Catelyn inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself, though her heart still beat with an echo of fury. "You killed my men," she said. "You crippled my son. At least, your family did. You took my husband's head, your boy King, Joffrey, had it spiked for all of King's Landing to gawk at. You have caused immeasurable harm, and I wonder if you have any regrets." Jaime let out a derisive little laugh. "Lady Stark, I did not personally push your boy from that tower, though I know what people say, and I did not personally give the order for the execution of your lord husband. But regrets?" He shrugged. "This is war. War does not ask whether we have regrets." Her fingers pressed around the hilt of the dagger. Her husband's blade lay in her other hand, the one she'd always kept hidden beneath her cloak. She had snatched it from Robb's tent before coming, not even sure then what she intended to do with it. The anger in her chest grew denser, heavier, until it felt like a living thing inside her. Jaime Lannister's words dripped with arrogance, and though his eyes flicked to the guard behind her, he did not show any real fear. "You stand as a hostage," Catelyn said. "My last advantage. You might secure the release of my daughters, or you might help us parley for peace. But every day that passes, I receive no word of Sansa, no news of Arya." Her voice broke ever so slightly, though she caught herself and swallowed back the quiver in her throat. "I have reason to think you and your kin are stalling, ignoring every raven we send. Why should I wait any longer?" His gaze flicked to her blade. "I suppose, my lady, that is the question you came here to answer." She stepped closer, shutting out the presence of the guards and the sound of her own pulse. The moment she was close enough to see the details of the stubble on his chin, she realized how easy it would be to drive that dagger into him. A single thrust between the ribs, a single cut to the throat. Jaime Lannister was unarmed, bound at her mercy. Would that truly end the war? Or would it spark something worse? She heard Ned's voice in the back of her mind, cautioning her, telling her there was honor in a fair exchange, injustice rather than vengeance. But Ned was gone, killed by this man's family. Her daughters, as far as she knew, were captive in King's Landing. There was no reason to trust that parley would save them. The days of fairness and honor seemed to be dead, lost somewhere between the great September of Baelor and the banks of the Trident. She thought of Robb, her boy forced to bear the crown and command men to war. She thought of Bran and Rickon, left behind in Winterfell, vulnerable, unprepared for the storms that might descend upon them. She thought of Sansa, so gentle, so trusting, stuck among Lannisters who regarded her life as little more than a pawn. And Arya, who roamed the realm somewhere, assuming she was still alive. Catelyn did not even know if her youngest daughter drew breath. The weight of that uncertainty would crush her if she paused to dwell on it for too long. It all came together in a single, blinding moment of decision. Something snapped in her, that fragile tether that had kept her abiding by the old rules of lords and ladies. Jaime Lannister had been a piece on the board, yes, a valuable piece. But he was also the walking embodiment of all that had gone wrong. He was a daily reminder of her husband's murder, and she realized she no longer wanted to cling to him as a bargaining chip. She wanted him gone so that the taste of old betrayal might not sour her mouth each morning. She wanted retribution. She raised the dagger. Jaime's grin faltered, genuine alarm flashing behind his eyes. "Lady Stark," he said, voice dropping. "If you do this, you lose any chance to it." She lunged before he could finish. She was not a warrior, not in the way Brienne of Tarth was, or any of Robb's bannermen. But the rage guided her hand, swift and unerring. The dagger sank into his chest just beneath the collarbone, sliding between the plates of battered armor and the flesh beneath. The metal bit so deep she felt her hand jolt as it hit bone. Jaime gasped, his body jerking back against the stool. The guards behind her shouted in surprise, but it was too late. Catelyn twisted the blade and pulled it free, blood dripping across her knuckles. Jaime's eyes went wide. For a heartbeat, he said nothing, only sputtering. Then he coughed up blood, a horrible wet sound. The mocking grin vanished, replaced by stunned disbelief and pain. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something else, but Catelyn struck again, a second blow that opened his throat in a spray of red. The guards leapt forward. One of them seized her arms, pulling her away as Jaime collapsed forward, choking on his own blood. A wave of dizziness swept over her at the sight of it. She had never killed a man in cold blood, not even in hot blood, before this night. Perhaps she expected it to solve something within her, to ease her torment. It did not. She felt only a numbness that threatened to swamp her. "My lady," one of the guards said, voice ragged with shock. "What have you?" "By the gods, he's dead." Jaime Lannister's body slumped, blood pooling around the stool's wooden legs. The Kingslayer was no more. Catelyn stared at the streaks of crimson on her dagger and let her hand drop to her side. She felt no rush of triumph, no sense of victory. She felt only the cold finality of what she had done. "Take his body," she managed to say. Her voice sounded distant in her own ears. "Send word to Robb. Jaime Lannister is dead." In that moment, she realized that everything had changed, all the intricately woven threads of the war, all the tenuous hopes for negotiation. There would be no quick trade for Sansa, for Arya. There might be no chance for parley at all. If a single rash act could incite a storm, then she had just unleashed a hurricane upon the realm. But she knew also that she had done it for her own reasons. For her children. For Ned. The burden of that choice weighed heavily on her shoulders, yet some part of her refused to regret it. She was no longer content to stand by and watch her family's honor be trampled upon. For better or for worse, this was the path she had chosen. She turned from the corpse of Jaime Lannister, the man who would have been their trump card, and walked out into the blackness of the night. A hush followed her, each guard too stunned even to speak. Overhead, the moon cast a pale glow across the encampment, and far off she heard the distant sounds of men stirring. The word would spread soon enough. The Kingslayer was dead by Lady Catelyn's hand. Let the realm reel. Let the consequences come. She had made her choice, and now she would bear it to whatever end. The uproar began before dawn. Robb Stark, the newly crowned king in the north, strode into her tent, eyes blazing with a fury she had never known from her gentle son. He was dressed in rough-spun breeches and a thick cloak of wolf pelts, having evidently dressed in haste, but the silver crown that rested upon his brow lent him a regal gravity beyond his years. She looked up from her seat, hands still trembling with the memory of what she had done. "Mother," Robb said, his tone somewhere between anguished and enraged. "Tell me you did not do this." She met his gaze, unwavering, though her heart pounded as it had last night. "I did." He exhaled sharply, shoulders tensing. "You have taken from me our greatest bargaining chip. With Jaime Lannister alive, there might have been terms for releasing Sansa and Arya. You might have exchanged him for thousands of our men not to die in the fields." Catelyn closed her eyes for a moment, recalling how she had once imagined returning home with her daughters safe behind her. That was a dream lost in the swirl of war. And what if you found that no exchange would ever come? That the Lannisters would sooner keep the girls as pawns and keep Jaime alive by feeding us false hopes? "I have had enough of their games, Robb. They murdered your father. They crippled Bran. They tried to kill us all in one way or another. I will not let them hold us in perpetual thrall." His voice grew hoarse. "Mother, you must understand. I am king in the north now, and I must make decisions for all our people, not just for vengeance. We could have used him. We needed him alive. She rose to her feet, noticing how much taller her son had grown, how the lines of his face were etched with a responsibility that no boy his age should bear. I understand, Robb, but the time for bargaining is done. Tywin Lannister would not have given us our girls. He would have squeezed us for every advantage, forced us into a corner until we had no choice but to surrender or lose everything. I saw no end to it. At least now the Lannisters know we are not afraid of retribution. He stared at her, searching her face for some sign of regret. He would find none. Or if he did, it was buried too deeply for her to show. The others will talk, Mother, he said. Roose Bolton, the Freys, the Mallisters, the Tullys, everyone will say that you have robbed the North of its rightful spoils of war. They will question my authority if I cannot keep order in my own camp. Catelyn felt a tremor in her chest, but she set her jaw. I will face their scorn. I will endure. The Tullys are my family, the Freys, well, Lord Walder might see advantage in making a new arrangement. But we cannot let their whispers sway us now. You are king, Robb, and no one will forget that, not after the battles you've won. He paced around the tent, fists clenched. She saw in him echoes of Ned, an unyielding sense of honor, a love for his family, and a painful awareness of the duties thrust upon him. She wanted to reach out to embrace him as she once had when he was a small child uncertain about the ways of the world. But she sensed that if she did, he would push her away. He was a king now, and any sign of softness might be misread. Finally, Robb turned, letting out a slow breath. It is done. We cannot change it. But we must prepare for what comes next. Tywin Lannister will want our heads for this. She nodded. Yes. He will not stop until he exacts a terrible price for Jaime's life. Then we will not be caught unprepared, Robb said. I must call a war council immediately. Our scouts have seen Lannister forces regrouping near the Red Fork. I will not let them slip around us. She bowed her head. I will be there if you wish. He paused, eyes flickering with pain. I do wish it, Mother. But be aware that not all my bannermen will welcome you gladly after this. She felt the sting of that truth. Once, she had been the steady hand of counsel, the calm mother figure who might help Robb navigate the pitfalls of politics. Now, she had become a source of discord, a woman who had taken an irrevocable step without consulting the broader leadership. But so be it. She would stand by her decision. The War Council convened in a large open-sided tent near the center of the encampment. The banners of the great houses loyal to Robb Stark flapped in the early morning breeze. The direwolf of Stark, the trident of Tully, the flayed man of Bolton, the sunburst of Karstark, the twin towers of Frey, and others. Lords and captains gathered around a makeshift table, faces set in hard lines. Roose Bolton stood with his arms crossed, his pale eyes flickering over Catelyn as she entered, though he said nothing. Black Walder Frey, one of Lord Walder's less savory grandsons, looked her way with a smirk she did not care to interpret. Others kept their expressions neutral or openly troubled. Only the great John Umber boomed out a greeting to her and Robb, though even his typically jovial voice carried a tinge of unease. Robb cleared his throat. He still wore his crown, an unspoken reminder to all present that he was their king. We face a grave test, he began, his young voice carrying surprising authority. Jaime Lannister is dead. A murmur rippled through those assembled. Though many had already heard rumors, the confirmation sent a fresh wave of shock or concern. Lord Bolton's lips tightened, and Catelyn saw the faintest flicker of frustration there. We can no longer trade the Kingslayer, Robb continued. We can no longer threaten Tywin with harm to his son if he does not release my sisters. I have no illusions about the nature of our position. The Lannisters will come for us, hard, seeking to avenge Jaime's blood. We must be prepared to meet them on the field or outmaneuver them if we can. The great John slammed a fist on the table. They'll come for us anyway. Tywin Lannister bleeds the Riverlands every day. Let them come. We'll fight them. The king in the north is unstoppable. Lord Bolton inclined his head. Perhaps so, Great John. But I would be remiss not to mention that the advantage of having a high-value prisoner is no small thing. Now that the Kingslayer is gone, we may face greater difficulties in. Catelyn could not remain silent. The Lannisters gave us no reason to believe they would ever honor any exchange. They teased the possibility while they continued to hold my daughters. We do not even know if both girls remain in King's Landing, or if Joffrey has already forced Sansa into some vile arrangement. We know nothing. I would not have us pinned in place by a false hope. Bolton's pale gaze flicked to her, unreadable. That is understandable, Lady Catelyn. Yet from a more pragmatic standpoint, It might have served us better to at least attempt further negotiations. But what's done is done. Robb placed a hand on the table's edge. Arguing over it changes nothing. We must decide how to respond. Tywin has regrouped near Harrenhal with the bulk of his forces. Some rumors say he means to march north. Others that he waits for another opportunity to crush our lines in the Riverlands. We need to be proactive. Edmure Tully, who stood at the edge of the gathering, nodded grimly. My father's health still declines at Riverrun. I cannot leave him for long, but the defense of the Riverlands is paramount. What do you propose, Your Grace? Robb glanced at the map spread across the table. We can't fight Tywin on ground of his choosing. Our best chance is to lure him into a position where we can strike decisively, or at least harry his forces. If we remain here, he will starve us out eventually. If we go to him directly, we risk our lines. We might coordinate with our allies in the Westerlands, if any can be found, or we might attempt a pincer movement with the Blackfish's scouts. But that is only half the matter. There's also the question of King's Landing and the Iron Throne. My sisters are there, under the watch of that monster, King Joffrey. Catelyn listened as the men discussed strategies, debated supply lines, and weighed the possibilities of forging new alliances. She felt uneasy under the silent scrutiny of some, but she kept her head held high. In the corners of her mind, she replayed her decision again and again. The blade, the blood, the final gurgling breath from Jaime Lannister. The memory was fresh enough to make her stomach churn, but she felt no regret. Only a cold acceptance. Eventually, the council concluded with a plan that involved splitting forces to protect key crossing points along the Trident while sending a vanguard to threaten the outskirts of Lannister territory. They hoped to bait Tywin into stretching himself too thin, at which point Robb could strike with the main host. It was a bold plan, one reliant on timing and secrecy. Roose Bolton was chosen to command the eastern flank near Harrenhal, while Edmure Tully shored up defenses around Riverrun. Robb would personally lead the main body of troops in a mobile campaign, ready to ride wherever the Lannisters moved. And Catelyn would remain with Robb for her counsel and for the sake of maintaining the Stark presence at the heart of the army. Despite the tension caused by her action, Robb did not cast her aside. For that, she silently thanked him. By the time the sun hung high in the sky, the camp bustled with fresh energy. War horns sounded as outriders prepared to depart, and the clank of armor and weapons reverberated in every direction. Word of Jaime Lannister's death had spread through every tent, every rank of soldiers, stirring a mixture of excitement and unease. Some men whispered that Lady Catelyn had avenged Ned Stark's memory in a single stroke, praising her for the boldness. Others fretted that the Lannisters would unleash all manner of horrors in response, a fear only underscored by the knowledge that Tywin Lannister was merciless in matters of vengeance. Catelyn made her way through the busy pathways between tents, accompanied by a pair of guards who had quietly placed themselves at her side for her protection. She had not asked for it, but she understood why they came. Should any hot-headed bannerman decide to lash out at her for robbing them of the chance to trade Jaime, she would need the guards' presence. As she walked, she thought of Sansa and Arya. If they yet lived in King's Landing, how might they be treated when the news of Jaime's death reached the capital? Would Joffrey's cruelty redouble? Would they punish her daughters for her act? That possibility gnawed at her. Killing Jaime had felt righteous in the moment, but that was before she let herself dwell on potential repercussions for her children. Now, the enormity of it weighed on her. She clenched her fists. She had to believe they would survive, that some form of divine justice would shield them, or that the Lannisters would have enough sense not to squander their last real leverage. She paused near the picket line where the horses were kept. There, she saw Grey Wind, Robb's dire wolf, pacing restlessly behind the flaps of a large pen. The massive wolf's eyes gleamed a golden hue, and he bared his teeth, though not at her. It was as if he sensed the tension in the camp, sensed his master's inner turmoil. The dire wolves had always seemed attuned to deeper currents. Lady Stark, came a soft voice from behind her. She turned to find Brienne of Tarth standing a short distance away, arms folded uncertainly. Brienne wore a battered breastplate, and her tall, powerful frame drew stares wherever she went. She had sworn herself to Catelyn's service after renouncing Renly Baratheon's cause. Catelyn had not known Brienne long, but she trusted her more than most. The tall woman had proven her courage and devotion countless times already. Brienne, Catelyn said, offering a gentle nod. Were you seeking me? I heard what you did. Brienne's voice was hushed as if she worried someone might overhear. "I do not judge you, my lady. I only wonder if you are, well?" Catelyn regarded her steadily. "I am as well as one can be, having done what I did." Brienne hesitated, glancing away. She was never one to mince words intentionally, yet Catelyn could sense her awkwardness. "I once dreamed of knighthood, of fighting for a king or queen worth following, but it seems every time I find one, blood and betrayal follow. I do not know if Jaime Lannister deserved death, but I know he did the realm much harm. Perhaps you have rid us of a viper. Or perhaps we shall see the realm burn in retribution. I cannot say." Catelyn nodded grimly. "Nor can I, but I will bear responsibility for it." "If you need me, my lady," Brienne said, eyes earnest, "if you need me to guard you or to ride out for your daughters, I will do whatever is required." A warmth stirred in Catelyn's chest. Amid the swirling uncertainty, it was reassuring to have someone as steadfast as Brienne. "I appreciate that more than you know. For the time being, remain by my side if you can, as guard and counsel. If the Lannisters send assassins or if someone within our own ranks seeks to harm me for my deed, I would feel safer with you near." Brienne inclined her head in a respectful bow. "It shall be done." Days turned into weeks as Robb's forces maneuvered across the riverlands. The weather shifted toward autumn's chill, and the leaves began to turn gold and red, a vivid tapestry that would have been beautiful in peacetime. Under the shadow of war, however, the colors only reminded everyone that winter drew nearer with each passing day. Robb's plan to harry Tywin's forces kept them constantly on the move. Scouts rode ahead, bringing news of small Lannister columns foraging in the countryside, and Robb dispatched outriders to ambush them. Villages burned, some by Lannister men, some unavoidably caught in the crossfire. The river lords under Edmure's command did what they could to protect small folk, but the heartbreak of war was everywhere. From time to time, Catelyn would receive ravens from Riverrun, carrying updates about Lord Hoster Tully's failing health, or from her sister Lisa in the Vale, who offered little help and much self-concern. No message came from King's Landing, nothing about Sansa or Arya. With each passing night, Catelyn's anxiety for her daughters sharpened, an ache that never left her. In the quiet hours before dawn, she would recall Jaime's gurgling last breath and wonder if she had sealed their fates as surely as she had sealed his. One evening, while camped beside a shallow stretch of the Tumblestone, Robb called his advisors together. Torchlight flickered against canvas walls as they gathered. Men were tired, muddy from riding, and morale was strained. Rumors said Tywin Lannister had clashed with Stannis Baratheon's forces near the Blackwater, or else had rushed to defend King's Landing from an Iron Fleet incursion. The Ravens gave conflicting accounts. Nobody knew the truth for certain. Robb gestured to a map pinned beneath daggers at each corner. If Tywin has indeed moved south to protect the capital from Stannis, then he has left the Westerlands vulnerable. We could seize the advantage, march into his homeland, and force him to fight us on ground we choose. Lord Rickard Karstark, leaning heavily on his sword, let out a grunt. "And risk an attack from behind if the rumors are false?" The great Jon spat. "Let them come from behind. We are wolves, we strike fast, and we hold our ground. The Lannisters are cut off from the rock if they're all playing at war near King's Landing." Catelyn cleared her throat. "My lords, if the Lannisters truly are engaged with Stannis, that means the city is under threat from another quarter. We might have a chance to free my daughters in the chaos. Perhaps we could coordinate with Stannis? If we sent an envoy to treat with him." But a chorus of scoffs interrupted her. Roose Bolton's thin smile was the most biting. "My lady, Stannis Baratheon does not strike me as a man who would easily share spoils or deviate from his claim to the Iron Throne. He might accept an alliance on paper, but in truth he would want our subservience, would he not? He claims the throne by right of blood. We claim the North's independence. That is a difficult chasm to bridge." Edmure frowned thoughtfully. "Yet if it gained the release of Sansa and Arya..." Robb rapped his knuckles on the table. "Peace, my lords. Let's keep to the main point. We do not know for certain whether Tywin has left Harrenhal, nor do we know the true state of King's Landing. Our best move might be to send more scouts. I will not commit the bulk of our forces to a risky push unless I know exactly where Tywin is." The men begrudgingly agreed, and Robb dismissed them. Catelyn lingered by the table, staring at the map. How vast the realm seemed, and how impossible it felt to be certain of anything. So many shifting alliances, so many hidden agendas. She thought again of Ned, how he had wanted only to do the honorable thing in King's Landing and had died for it. Perhaps she had just done a darker reflection of the same, an act that might come to haunt her children even as she believed it necessary. Robb stepped beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You think often of them, don't you?" he asked quietly. She closed her eyes. "Every moment. Ned, Sansa, Arya, even Bran and Rickon far to the north. Every path I see leads to more danger. I wish we had a sign, anything, to tell us they are safe." His grip tightened a little reassuringly. "We will get them back, Mother. One way or another we will bring the girls home. This war will not end until we do." She nodded, forcing a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Robb." Then, after a pause, she added, "I'm proud of you. The way you've led these men, the way you conduct yourself as a king, your father would be proud too." His features softened. "I hope so." 2 weeks later, a significant skirmish broke out near a crossroads close to Harrenhal. One of Robb's outriding units came galloping back with news that a large Lannister column, led by Gregor Clegane, was pillaging a nearby village and advancing east. Robb acted swiftly, summoning his bannermen and preparing to meet them. Catelyn wanted to remain near the rear, trusting that her presence in the thick of battle would serve little purpose. But she refused to sit idle, so she rode with the baggage train, accompanied by Brienne and a small guard, close enough to observe the outcome. Dawn broke cold and gray over the fields. The ground was damp from an overnight rain, making the footing treacherous for cavalry. Robb's forces positioned themselves in a shallow valley, hoping to use the terrain to their advantage. The horns sounded the approach of the Lannister forces, and soon the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel filled the morning air. As the men in Stark livery poured forth to meet the enemy, Catelyn could see Gregor Clegane's banner, a black field emblazoned with a gauntlet looming over the chaos. The Mountain, as they called him, was said to be near unstoppable in brute strength. She prayed that the gods would protect her son from that monster, but Robb had a gift for tactics. He had laid traps. Hidden lines of spearmen to disrupt cavalry charges, archers concealed in nearby copses of trees. Within the first hour, the advantage swung heavily toward the Northmen. Even so, the fighting was fierce. Bolts and arrows whistled overhead, men screamed and fell, horses reared and kicked. The muddy fields churned underfoot. From her vantage, Catelyn saw Roose Bolton's men encircle the left flank of the Lannisters, cutting off their retreat. She also saw Robb's banner wave proudly at the center, indicating he was in the thick of the struggle. Her heart pounded as she watched, helpless but for the possibility of praying to the Seven. Brienne stood beside her, eyes scanning the battlefield, prepared to defend Catelyn at a moment's notice. The guards around them tightened formation lest any stray Lannister knights attempt to flank. With a final surge, Robb's men collapsed the Lannister line, sending them into a rout. The Mountain's banner disappeared into a swirl of smoke and chaos, and word soon reached Catelyn that he had fled the field, leaving the battered Lannister forces to fend for themselves. When the fighting ended, hundreds of corpses lay upon the mud, some in crimson and gold, others in the dire wolf gray. The crows would feast well that day. Catelyn dismounted and picked her way through the aftermath, sickened by the sight of bloodied faces and missing limbs. This was the reality of war she had long dreaded. She found Robb near a cluster of wounded soldiers, removing his helmet and wiping sweat from his brow. He had a fresh gash across his left arm, but it did not appear life-threatening. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to his side. He shook his head. "A scratch, no more." Yet his face was pale, and he grimaced when he tried to move it. "We've routed them." Bolton's men claimed to have taken several prisoners. No sign of Gregor Clegane, though. He vanished. "But we hold the field." She laid a hand on his good arm. "You fought bravely, my son. You have a gift for this, though I wish you did not need it." A tired, haunted look flickered across his features. "So do I." He gazed around at the carnage, lines of men sobbing in pain, dying in the muck. "This is not what I imagined war to be. A part of me always thought it would be glory and triumph. But there is no glory in this." Catelyn's throat tightened. "We do what we must." He nodded grimly. "Yes. And we must carry on, mustn't we?" She embraced him carefully, mindful of his wound. Then she stepped back, letting him see her composure. "We must." That night, they set up camp on drier ground a league from the battlefield. Fires burned throughout the camp as healers tended to the wounded, and the moans of the dying drifted in the chill air. Catelyn offered what comfort she could, helping to bring water and offering words of solace where possible, but she felt helpless against the vast tide of suffering. She thought of Winterfell, safe behind its ancient walls, the crypts beneath it filled with the bones of her husband's ancestors. She longed to be somewhere, anywhere, that was not this field of pain. Word reached her that the prisoners included several lesser Lannister knights, a handful of crossbowmen, and a minor cousin of the Lannisters by marriage. None of them held the same value as Jaime had, but perhaps that was no longer relevant. Her choice had been made, and the war would grind on until either the North was beaten or the Iron Throne was forced to recognize their sovereignty. Near midnight, she sat by Robb's command fire. The warmth on her face was a small mercy, though her thoughts kept drifting to the wounded in the healers' tents. Around her, the lords debated the next march. North or west? Strike deeper toward Lannister lands or hold the Riverlands? Suddenly, a rider arrived at breakneck speed, nearly tumbling off his horse in his haste. He shoved a dispatch into Robb's hands, panting heavily. From Riverrun, your grace, the rider managed between gasps. A raven came. Urgent. Robb took the scroll, his brow furrowing as he read the contents. Then his face went still, a stoic mask, but his knuckles whitened on the parchment. Catelyn rose, her stomach twisting. What is it? She asked. Robb looked at her, and she knew it could not be good news. It's from Uncle Brynden. He writes that word has come from King's Landing. They have announced the death of Jaime Lannister publicly. Apparently we have been named traitors and regicides, which we expected. But he swallowed hard. Joffrey he has declared that Sansa Stark shall stand trial for treason, for her father's crimes, and for our own. And if she is found guilty, the punishment is death. Tom seemed to slow around them. The men gathered fell silent, gazes locking on mother and son. Catelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Sansa, they wouldn't, she said, voice trembling. She's just a child. Roose Bolton's quiet, measured tone cut through the night. He is a cruel boy king, my lady. He has already shown a penchant for public beheadings. Catelyn shook her head in disbelief, tears threatening to blur her vision. He can't, my daughter, we have to do something. Robb's face was grim, every bit the king in that moment. We will do something. If the Lannisters dare harm my sister, there will be no mercy for them. Not even in their precious King's Landing. He paused as though fighting to keep his composure. But we cannot dash to King's Landing blindly. We'd be cut down. We must think strategically. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Jaime's blood-soaked visage returned to her, haunting her mind. Had she truly, through her vengeful act, signed Sansa's death warrant? Brienne laid a hand on Catelyn's shoulder. My lady, we will find a way. Sansa will not die. We will rescue her. Robb hesitated, eyes flicking to the men around him. Some looked uncertain, others resolute. We must plan carefully. If Tywin is indeed engaged with Stannis, the capital might be weaker than usual. But we cannot count on that. Joffrey still has the Kingsguard, the City Watch, and who knows how many Sellswords at his beck and call. A direct assault would be suicide. Edmure Tully raked a hand through his hair. Perhaps we can coordinate with Stannis or Renly's remnants, if that is even feasible. If the city stands divided, we might slip inside or force them to bargain. Catelyn, my lady, did you not once attempt to broker an alliance between Renly and Robb? She shook her head numbly. That was before Renly was killed under suspicious circumstances. I don't know if Stannis would trust me now or if he even wants an alliance with the North. But if it saves Sansa, I would try anything. Her words hung in the smoky air. Finally, Robb summoned a breath. Enough for tonight. We will rest, and at dawn we will gather fresh intelligence. We send ravens to any lord who might hear us, any rebellious faction within the city that might help. We will not let Sansa face this alone. Catelyn nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks unbidden. She wanted to be strong, but the thought of her sweet daughter alone in that viper's nest, awaiting a trial that would be nothing more than a mockery, broke her heart. She felt the stares of the men around her, some pitying, some grimly determined. It did not matter. She had lost too much already to allow this to happen. Later, by the dying embers of the command fire, she sat wrapped in a cloak, staring into the darkness. Her dagger lay near her hand, the very blade she had used to kill Jaime Lannister. Sometimes, in the flickering light, she thought she could still see the blood upon it. The wind whispered through the camp, carrying the soft moans of the wounded and the murmurs of tired soldiers. She found no peace in the quiet. Brienne stayed beside her, silent but loyal, a comforting presence. Eventually, Catelyn sighed. I need to pray. The tall woman nodded. Shall I escort you to the Sept tent, my lady? Yes. Though I wonder if the gods will even hear me now. Before dawn, Catelyn knelt in a makeshift Sept tent near the outskirts of the camp. It was a simple structure of canvas, housing a small altar with icons of the Seven. She had lit a few candles, their flames dancing in the pre-dawn gloom. She pressed her hands together and closed her eyes. Mother, watch over my children, she whispered. Take my life if you must, but spare them. Spare Sansa. She is blameless in all of this. The ache in her chest grew sharper with every word. She felt tears slipping down her cheeks again, unbidden. She did not ask forgiveness for killing Jaime Lannister. She did not believe she deserved it nor that she would receive it. Instead, she asked only for her daughters to be saved. Perhaps, she thought bleakly, it was already too late. A noise at the entrance made her turn. Robb stood there, silhouetted by a faint, gray light. He spoke softly. "Mother, I did not mean to disturb you." She shook her head, rising unsteadily. "It's all right?" He came forward, eyes filled with concern. In the soft glow of the candles, he looked older than his years. "I could not sleep. The thought of Sansa facing trial, of Joffrey holding her fate, it makes my blood boil. I'm not sure how to rescue her, but I swear I will. If there's a way to slip men into the city, or to force a bargain with Tywin, or to do anything, we will. I can't abandon her. Nor can I let Arya remain lost, gods know where." She reached out and held his hand. "You are a good brother, Robb. And a good king." He shook his head. "I'm a king who let his mother kill our one bargaining chip. Perhaps I'm no better than the boy king, letting my emotions guide me." She flinched slightly at the reproach in his tone, but she knew he did not mean to wound her. He was stating facts as plainly as he could. "I regret that it might cost us Sansa. But I do not regret putting an end to Jaime Lannister. Sometimes I think if I had faced him sooner, maybe Ned would still be alive." Robb squeezed her hand gently. "We can't dwell on what might have been. We only have the future now." She released a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes, the future." They stood there for a moment, mother and son, bathed in candlelight. The hush of early morning pressed in around them, heavy with unspoken worries. Outside, the soldiers would soon stir, horns would sound, and the relentless march of war would continue. As it happened, a raven arrived later that day bearing unexpected tidings. Lord Tywin Lannister had indeed moved south to confront Stannis Baratheon at King's Landing. Stannis had attacked by the Blackwater only to be met and routed by a combined force of Tywin's reinforcements and the cunning use of wildfire orchestrated by the royal alchemists. Stannis had retreated, though not entirely destroyed. Addition. This left Tywin newly ascendant in King's Landing, praised by King Joffrey as the savior of the capital. In the same missive, there was more ominous news. In celebration of his victory, Joffrey intended a court session in which he would try Sansa Stark for the crimes of her father and mother, culminating in a sentence that could be anything from forced marriage to the headsman's block. The date of this spectacle was only days away. Panic and fury swept through the Stark camp. Men who had seen Sansa grow up in Winterfell cursed the Lannisters anew. The northern lords demanded they march south, that they tear through the riverlands and storm the capital. Yet reason prevailed. As an assault on King's Landing with Tywin's triumphant army entrenched there would be near impossible. Robb's face grew darker with every suggestion, as though he carried the weight of the entire realm's injustice upon his shoulders. In the midst of this crisis, another rumor surfaced. The Tyrells, newly allied with the crown, had begun sending supplies and reinforcements to King's Landing. The city was flush with food and gold once again, while the Northmen struggled to feed their host from the scorched riverlands. A direct siege was out of the question. Desperate, Robb agreed to send a covert envoy to King's Landing, a small party that might slip into the city unnoticed and attempt to locate Sansa, or at least discover the truth of her fate. It was a dangerous mission akin to a suicide run. Still, several brave knights volunteered, along with certain men from the Riverlands who had old ties in the capital. Catelyn did not volunteer. Her place, she reasoned, was with Robb, though the guilt gnawed at her. She wanted to save Sansa herself, to break into the Red Keep if necessary. But she knew she would do more harm than good in such a stealth endeavor. And so the envoy departed one moonless night, hearts full of uncertain hope. Catelyn watched them ride away, the shapes of their horses vanishing into the darkness. She prayed to the mother, to the warrior, to the stranger even, that they might find her daughter alive and bring her to safety. As the days ticked by, news trickled in from scouts and spies. Joffrey's court session for Sansa was rumored to be a lavish affair, public, brutal, designed to humiliate the Starks. Catelyn could barely sleep, consumed by thoughts of what might be happening to her child. Each night, she dreamed of Ned's execution on the steps of the Great September, replaying that horror but with Sansa in his place. She would wake with a cry, drenched in cold sweat, Brienne's steady presence offering what comfort it could. Robb tried to hold the army together, but frustration mounted among the lords. They wanted a clear plan, a path to victory or at least to rescue. But Tywin was dug in and the realm was battered. Whispers circulated in the camps that maybe the king in the north should sue for peace, though few dared say it openly. Others insisted they push westward, strike at Lannister lands directly, and force Tywin's hand. Every proposal carried dire risks. On the 8th day after the envoy's departure, a single horse returned near dusk. The rider slumped in the saddle, nearly dead from a sword wound in his side. The guards rushed him to Robb's pavilion, where Catelyn stood by as Maester Qyburn from the Riverlord's retinue tried to staunch the bleeding. The man coughed up blood, shaking violently. "What happened?" Robb demanded, voice urgent yet gentle. "Where are the others?" The rider, a grizzled soldier named Ryman, managed to rasp out broken words. "All caught. The gold cloaks found us. We tried to find the girl. A contact in Flea Bottom sold us out. The Lannisters, too many. We couldn't." A spasm of coughing racked him, and blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Catelyn bent low, her heart pounding. "Did you see my daughter? Is Sansa still alive?" Ryman's eyes unfocused for a moment, then fixed on her with a flicker of pity. "Saw her from a distance. They had her in the Red Keep, locked away. Trial soon. Couldn't get close. The city's crawling with Lannister men, Tyrell men. There's no chance." His words drifted and his eyes rolled back. Maester Qyburn frantically pressed cloth to the wound, but it was too late. The soldier died there, breath rattling in his throat, taking whatever other knowledge he had to the grave. Catelyn stood frozen, choking back a sob. Robb's fists clenched, and he turned away, fury radiating from him. "Gods! They've turned King's Landing into a fortress. Our men can't even sneak inside. And now, Sansa." Catelyn closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "What do we do?" No one spoke. The silence in that pavilion was like a weight pressing upon them all. Catelyn thought of Jaime Lannister lying in a pool of blood at her feet, and a wave of bitter sorrow crashed over her. She had slain him to avenge Ned, to deny the Lannisters their manipulations. But in doing so, had she condemned her own daughter to die? Another council convened, this time with a sense of desperation. Some lords argued for an all-out assault on King's Landing. Others insisted they maneuver west to lure Tywin away from the city, though that would still leave Sansa in danger. Catelyn noticed a growing rift among the northern lords, especially those who had lost kin on the battlefield and saw no quick victory. They wanted results, but no one could guarantee them. Roose Bolton's voice cut through the clamor, quiet but pointed. "If we cannot breach King's Landing and cannot force Tywin to come out, perhaps we should consider more subtle methods." Robb frowned. "What do you mean?" Bolton's pale eyes flickered. "Assassination. A strike at the heart of the Lannister power, be it Tywin, Joffrey, or the key advisors around them. Cut off the head of the snake and the body will writhe. We might create enough chaos to free your sister." A murmur of unease spread through the tent. The suggestion of skullduggery and murder offended many lords' sense of honor. But the hour was dark, and the knights had already died in a covert attempt. The lines between honorable warfare and desperation had blurred. Catelyn's breath caught in her throat. Could it be done? Could an assassin slip into the Red Keep where an armed envoy could not? The thought chilled her. But if it spared Sansa? Robb closed his eyes as though waging an internal battle. "We are not cutthroats," he said quietly. "We are men of the North," Great John Umber rumbled, "not sly Dornish devils. But in times of war, sometimes we must." "No," Robb snapped, opening his eyes. Then his gaze flicked to Catelyn, and she could see the agony in them. "We walk a perilous path already. If we stoop to murdering Tywin in his bed, we become the very thing we despise. And if it fails, we give them all the justification they need to slaughter Sansa out of hand." Bolton did not press further, but Catelyn noticed the faint tightening of his lips, as if he had expected no less. Others in the tent sagged with the weight of the realization there were no easy answers. When the council ended, men left with dark expressions, muttering curses at the Lannisters, at Tywin, at the entire war. Catelyn lingered, feeling an emptiness in her chest. Brienne approached, her face etched with concern. "My lady, I don't know how to save your daughter, but if there's any mission you wish to send me on, I will go. Even if it means my life." She reached out and clasped the woman's hand. "Thank you, Brienne. I know you would. But Robb is right, any open attempt to breach the city or kill its rulers will surely end in disaster. The Lannisters hold every advantage right now." Brienne bowed her head, frustration evident in the tense line of her jaw. "Then perhaps the gods will intervene." Catelyn wished she could believe that. That evening, as she sat alone in her tent, a cold wind rattled the canvas walls. She stared at the camp's small hearth, flames dancing around charred wood. A swirl of memories filled her mind. Winterfell's halls in the summer sun, the tranquil Godwood pond, Ned's quiet smile, Sansa's bright laughter. It all felt so distant, as if it belonged to another life. When a guard announced a visitor, she nearly refused him, but then Roose Bolton stepped inside without waiting for permission. He bowed politely, though the gesture felt perfunctory. "My lady." She rose, uneasy. Lord Bolton, what brings you here at this hour? He studied her with those unsettling pale eyes. We are at an impasse, are we not? Catelyn tensed. If you have more suggestions of murder, He held up a placating hand. I only came to say that I understand your predicament. You feel responsible for your daughter's danger. You feel that your actions, your slaying of Jaime, contributed to this. She swallowed hard, anger and grief swirling in her. I do. He inclined his head. I make no judgments. War brings out the darkest impulses in all of us. But perhaps it is not too late to salvage something. Her voice edged with bitterness. You heard Rob. We cannot force Tywin's hand, and we dare not attempt a cunning infiltration again. So tell me, my lord, what remains? Bolton pursed his lips, stepping closer. Tywin may be cunning, but he is not invincible. His position in King's Landing depends on maintaining the loyalty of the Tyrells and the City Watch, among others. If we could sow discord among his allies. She gave a hollow laugh. And how would we do that from here? We have no resources in the city, no means to bribe or cajole them without revealing ourselves. A small, calculating smile touched Bolton's face. True, but sometimes it only takes a single rumor, well placed, to ignite suspicion. I have acquaintances. Old connections, some might say. Perhaps we can still manage a whisper campaign in the capital. Catelyn's gaze sharpened. You suggest using secrets to tear apart Tywin's coalition. But that might take time Sansa does not have. Desperate times, Lady Catelyn. If you wish to act, I could dispatch certain agents I trust, individuals more adept at blending into the shadows than a knight in shining armor. He paused, letting the implication linger. But I would require your endorsement, or at least your silence. Her heart pounded. She did not fully trust Roose Bolton, never had. There was something unnerving about him, a certain detachment that bordered on cruelty. But if he offered a slim chance to sow chaos in King's Landing to stay Joffrey's hand, how could she refuse? She drew a steadying breath. If it might save Sansa, I will not stand in your way. Bolton's smile widened fractionally. Then I shall see to the necessary arrangements. May the gods be with us. He gave a slight bow and withdrew, leaving Catelyn alone with her thoughts. She realized that in her desperation, she had just tacitly agreed to let Roose Bolton wage a covert war of intrigue and sabotage. She could only hope it would help rather than harm them all. Her mind drifted to Ned again, to how he would have scorned the idea of playing the game in such a way. Yet the world had changed. Honor alone had not saved Ned from the executioner's blade, nor Jaime from hers. That night, she barely slept, haunted by images of Sansa standing before the Iron Throne, a vulture's court arrayed against her. Catelyn prayed that the next Raven would bring better news, anything to suggest that the storm she had unleashed by killing Jaime might have some path to resolution. Yet even as she prayed, she felt a creeping dread that the worst was yet to come. Weeks passed, each day a slow torture for Catelyn. Tywin's forces remained in firm control of King's Landing, propping up Joffrey's throne. Stannis lurked somewhere in the Stormlands, rebuilding his strength. The Northmen and their Riverland allies attempted to consolidate their positions, forging new supply lines and reinforcing key strongholds. The plan was to wait out the possibility that Tywin would eventually have to leave the city to quell some other threat or risk an uprising in the Westerlands. But each day of waiting felt like a knife in Catelyn's heart. Rumors reached them that Joffrey's trial of Sansa was delayed, perhaps at the insistence of Tywin, who wanted to handle the matter with utmost spectacle, or perhaps because they awaited the full presence of the Tyrells to witness the show. Whatever the reason, it bought Catelyn time, but at a dreadful cost of constant anxiety. Roose Bolton departed in secret with a small retinue, ostensibly to secure Harrenhal, which had changed hands more times than anyone could count. Catelyn suspected his real purpose was to orchestrate whatever subtle plan he had in mind, but she could not be certain. She only knew that she had not heard from him since. Meanwhile, Robb engaged in minor skirmishes, keeping their morale from collapsing altogether. Yet the looming threat over Sansa's fate cast a pall on every victory. One cold morning, Catelyn walked along the ridge overlooking the Tumblestone, its waters flowing placid despite the war. Brienne accompanied her in silence. The crisp air stung Catelyn's cheeks, and she drew her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She wondered if there was any path to peace or if she had merely hastened the realm's descent into endless violence. "Have I doomed my child?" she asked aloud, not expecting an answer. "Did the gods punish me by allowing Ned to die, only for me to make matters worse? Is this the cost of vengeance? Brienne's gaze flicked her way. "My lady, you only did what any mother would do. Sometimes, fate twists our actions in ways we cannot foresee." Catelyn nodded absently. "I told myself that. I believed killing Jaime would serve justice, or at least free us from false negotiations. But now, I would give anything to have him alive if it meant Sansa's safety." They reached a small outcropping of rock, and Catelyn paused to stare at the rushing river. A memory came to her unbidden. Ned telling her that decisions born of fear or anger seldom end well. She had acted in anger. Perhaps now she had no choice but to endure the consequences. Brienne rested a hand on the pommel of her sword. "The war is not over. We still have hope." Catelyn tried to take solace in that, but it felt thin as a breath on a winter morning. That afternoon, a horn call announced the arrival of a messenger. A single rider under a white flag approached the Stark lines. Suspicion buzzed among the soldiers. Could this be a trap? But the man carried no weapon but a sealed letter bearing the crest of House Tyrell. The messenger insisted it was to be delivered to Catelyn Stark personally. Robb received the man under guard in the presence of Catelyn and several lords. The messenger knelt, presenting the letter. "From Lady Margaery Tyrell, your grace." "My lady," he added, bowing to Catelyn. Catelyn exchanged a glance with Robb, who nodded for her to take it. She broke the seal, heart-pounding, and unrolled the parchment. The words inside were written in a graceful hand. "Lady Catelyn Stark, I write to you in these troubled times with a proposition. I grieve the atrocities that have befallen your house. Rumor holds that your daughter Sansa stands accused of treason. My position in King's Landing is precarious, yet I have some small influence with the crown. I may be able to intercede given that my betrothal to King Joffrey places me in a certain proximity to the seat of power. If you are willing to consider a mutual benefit, I propose a discreet meeting between a representative you trust and myself. There are matters we might negotiate that could see your daughter's life spared and mine improved. We must be cautious, for Lord Tywin Lannister observes all. Enclosed are instructions for where a small party might rendezvous with one of my trusted ladies in waiting. Let us speak in confidence and see if we cannot find a path that spares more bloodshed. In hopes of a more peaceful tomorrow. Margaery of House Tyrell." Catelyn's heart leapt. Margaery Tyrell, betrothed to Joffrey after Renly's death, might indeed have influence. Or this could be a trap devised by the Lannisters. She read the letter aloud in a soft voice, and the men around her stirred with excitement and caution in equal measure. Robb's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Margaery Tyrell, she's cunning by all accounts, but also known to be compassionate. Could she be an ally? Lord Karstark glowered. "She's betrothed to that monster, Joffrey. That speaks ill of her." Edmure Tully stroked his beard. But it was a political match. The Tyrells gained favor after the Blackwater. They might resent how much power Tywin wields. Perhaps the Lady Margaery seeks to carve out her own influence. Catelyn clenched the parchment. If there is any chance this could save Sansa, we must consider it. But we should be wary of traps. Robb nodded. "We will send a small, discreet party as requested, but we will also ensure they are not defenseless." "I would go," Catelyn said immediately, her voice resolute. Her son frowned. "It is too dangerous. If it is a trap, then they will want me most of all. This is my daughter's life at stake, Robb. I cannot stand by and let someone else negotiate for her. Let me do this." He looked torn, scanning her face. "Mother, you've already risked so much. I don't want to lose you too." She placed a hand on his cheek. "You will not lose me. I swear it, but I must do this." After a moment, he nodded reluctantly. "Brienne will accompany you, and a small guard of your choosing. If anything seems amiss, return at once." She breathed a shaky sigh of relief. This was the first sign of hope she had seen in weeks. Perhaps, by some miracle, Lady Margaery's intervention could avert the worst of Joffrey's cruelty. For days later, Catelyn rode south under the guidance of the messenger. She had chosen Brienne and 5 loyal soldiers sworn to House Tully. They traveled in plain cloaks without heraldry, carrying only light arms so as not to provoke the attention of Lannister patrols. The instructions Margaery had provided led them to a nondescript wayside near a small stream, far from major roads. Rumor had it the place had once been prosperous, but war had diminished its custom. They arrived at dusk. The innkeeper, a nervous man with sunken eyes, seemed relieved when they paid for a private room. He did not ask many questions, which suited Catelyn fine. She and her companions settled in, scanning the dusty corners of the common room for any sign of Tyrell agents. Finally, near midnight, a hooded figure slipped inside. Lady Stark, a soft voice greeted her. I come from Lady Margaery. Brienne tensed, hand on her sword, but Catelyn gestured for calm. She studied the stranger, slender of build, wearing a simple cloak. The voice sounded young, female. You are expected, she said quietly. They followed the hooded figure out a back door, across a small courtyard, and into a barn that smelled of stale hay. There, another cloaked shape waited. When the second figure pushed back her hood, Catelyn's breath caught. Margaery Tyrell stood before her, luminous even in the dim lantern light, her brown hair coiled artfully, her eyes bright with determination. Lady Stark, Margaery said, inclining her head in a gesture of respect. I am grateful you have come. Catelyn inclined her head in return. My lady, I pray you truly mean to help my daughter. If this is a trap, Margaery shook her head fervently. It is not. Believe me, I would not risk coming here myself if I intended betray. Al, my grandmother taught me to see alliances where they can be made. You need my help, and in truth, I may need yours. Brienne watched warily, one hand never straying far from her sword. The handful of Tully guards remained near the barn's entrance, watching the shadows for any sign of approach. Catelyn forced herself to remain calm. Then speak plainly. My daughter's life is in danger. King Joffrey might have her executed for a crime she never committed. Margaery's lips pressed together in a grim line. Yes, he might. He flaunts his cruelty. He thinks it pleases the crowd, makes him appear strong. I have tried to dissuade him, but Tywin holds the real power behind the throne, and the more I push, the more suspicious they become of me. Catelyn felt a glimmer of hope and dread mingling. Why then do you risk meeting me? Margaery drew a breath. Because I believe Sansa's innocence is clear, and because I want a kingdom not ruled by fear and bloodshed. My family stepped in to support Joffrey at the Blackwater, but we did not expect the scale of his sadism. My grandmother, Lady Olenna, is working behind the scenes, but Tywin is cunning. We cannot simply free Sansa without repercussions. Then what can you do? Catelyn asked, voice urgent. Margaery glanced at Brienne and the guards, then back to Catelyn. Tywin wishes to strengthen the alliance with the Tyrells by wedding me to Joffrey. But if Sansa were to vanish before the wedding, or better yet, if we staged some kind of shift in power that forced Joffrey aside, we might save her. I do not speak of open rebellion, it must be subtle. The city is filled with men loyal to the Lannisters, and House Tyrell alone cannot fight them. But if we had an agreement with the North, or if certain other forces aligned at just the right moment. Catelyn's eyes widened. You speak of overthrowing Joffrey? A faint, wry smile curved Margaery's lips. I speak of protecting my future husband from the consequences of his own excesses. Perhaps in the process, the realm might see a new order. One where cruelty is not the rule of law. She paused, meeting Catelyn's gaze intently. But I am only a piece on the board, as are you. If we join forces, we might tip the scales. If we do nothing, Sansa dies and Joffrey rules with Tywin's blessing until all enemies are crushed. Catelyn's heart pounded. To remove Joffrey from the throne would require a powerful coalition or at least a cunning plan. The North fights for independence, and we have no desire to see another Southern king enthroned over us. But to save my daughter, I might consider alliances I once thought impossible. Margaery nodded slowly. We need not decide every detail tonight. My grandmother and I are working on a plan, one that might see Joffrey replaced discreetly. Tommen is younger, gentler, and easier to guide. Tywin might prefer a stable puppet to a rabid dog of a king. If we orchestrate it with care, Sansa might be spared, even freed. But I will need your cooperation, some sign that the North will not take advantage of the turmoil to sack the city. Catelyn felt dizzy, as if the ground under her feet had shifted. 1,000 thoughts whirled in her mind: Ned's honor, the old ways, the fury of Tywin Lannister if the Tyrells conspired against Joffrey. This was treason upon treason. But if it saved Sansa? She swallowed and managed a nod. We want our daughter safely returned, and we want recognition of the North's freedom. If you can help achieve that, then perhaps we can find common ground. Margaery's eyes gleamed. Then we shall attempt to do the impossible. I will keep you informed through this messenger, quietly. When the time comes, we will need you to coordinate with certain allies inside the city. We have only one chance, Lady Stark. Catelyn looked at this young woman, so poised, so controlled, stepping onto a dangerous stage. You risk your own life for this. Margaery's smile was sad, resigned. I do. But better that than live under Joffrey's madness. Or watch Sansa die knowing I could have acted. With that, the two women clasped hands in a solemn pact beneath the lantern's flicker. Catelyn felt a surge of resolve. If the gods granted them the chance, she would move heaven and earth to save her daughter. And if she had to conspire with the Tyrells to unseat Joffrey Baratheon, so be it. The memory of Jaime Lannister's death still weighed on her, a stark reminder of the cost of inaction and the cost of vengeance alike. Yet perhaps at the edge of this dark and blood-stained path, a glimmer of hope remained. In that barn, far from prying eyes, Lady Catelyn Stark and Lady Margaery Tyrell forged an alliance that might change the course of the war, one final attempt to save a girl who had done no wrong in a world where justice and mercy were in short supply. Catelyn prayed that in the end, it would not all come crashing down, that she had not stepped onto a road paved only with illusions. For the sake of Sansa, for the sake of all she had lost, she would see this through, no matter the danger. If the realm was to be torn apart, let it be torn apart in the name of saving her child rather than surrendering to another monstrous Lannister king. There, in the hush of midnight, with the wind hissing through the cracks in the barn walls and Brienne standing guard at her side, Catelyn felt, for the first time in what seemed like ages, a spark of genuine hope. She held onto it tightly, a fragile ember in the darkness, determined not to let it die. Catelyn left the Wayside Inn at first light, her mind afire with possibility. On the ride back, she clutched Margaery's letter, filled with the rough outlines of the plan they had dared whisper about in the barn. Every so often, she glanced at it to be sure it was real, that she had not dreamed it. The words on the parchment were a lifeline, however slender, to rescue Sansa from Joffrey's twisted version of justice. More than that, they offered a path that might fracture the Lannister grip on the throne. She traveled with Brienne and her 5 Tully guards, all of them tense each time they passed a lonely farmstead or glimpsed movement beneath the trees. Lannister patrols were everywhere in the south. They hid themselves in thickets more than once, controlling their frightened horses with whispered commands until the patrols thundered by. By the time they reached the relative safety of the northern encampment, all were exhausted. The sun had dropped behind a distant ridge, staining the sky in bands of pink and gold as though the heavens themselves hovered between beauty and bloodshed. Robb waited outside his command tent when she arrived, his posture rigid. He was still armored from some reconnaissance ride, and gray wind lurked at his side, ears pricked. The moment he saw her, his shoulders eased, though the worry in his eyes remained. Around him, the camp was dimly lit by torches, men stirring soup pots and feeding weary horses. The wind carried the sharp tang of the approaching autumn. She slid down from her horse and handed the reins to a stable boy before moving toward him. Brienne followed silently. "What happened?" Robb asked in a low voice. "Did you meet her?" "Yes," Catelyn said, feeling the tremor of relief that came from being back among allies. "And it seems real. Margaery Tyrell might be our one chance to save Sansa." Robb exhaled. "Tell me everything." She led him into the tent with gray wind padding behind. Inside, several of Robb's bannermen were gathered: Edmure Tully, Rickard Karstark, the Great John, and a few others. Roose Bolton was still absent, presumably off at Harrenhal or spinning whatever webs he had promised to spin. By the glow of camp lanterns, she recounted the meeting, Margaery's secrecy, the proposed arrangement, the possibility of setting aside Joffrey in favor of the younger Tommen, the quiet promise that Sansa would be spared. Every word drew the men deeper into a hush. When Catelyn finished, she held out the parchment. Robb read it carefully, his frown deepening with each line. Karstark scowled at the mention of alliances with the Tyrells, while the Great John let out a rough, thoughtful grunt. Edmure Tully looked torn, chewing on his lip as he always did when uncertain. Robb finally set the parchment aside. On its face, it sounds like treason against the crown, a second treason on top of ours, as the Lannisters would style it. Yet we're already branded rebels. The question is whether we can trust the Tyrells enough to coordinate such a plot. The Great John rumbled, "We put all our hopes on the notion that a southern lady might outmaneuver Tywin Lannister in his own city. The Tyrells are cunning, but Tywin has proven nigh unstoppable." Edmure nodded. "True, but remember, the Tyrells hold the breadbasket of Westeros. If they cut off food shipments, King's Landing starves in months. Tywin needs them just as much as they need him. Perhaps the precarious balance is precisely what Lady Margaery wishes to exploit." Rickard Karstark cleared his throat. "If she truly aims to remove Joffrey, we're taking an enormous risk. The next King Tommen would still be a Lannister by name. Even if the boy is gentler, Tywin remains the true power. The entire realm could unify behind that child, leaving the North out in the cold." Catelyn steadied her voice. "I do not see how the Tyrells could simply remove Tywin from the game, though Margaery hinted there might be ways to circumvent his wrath. Maybe they'll try to show him that Joffrey's tyranny risks turning the realm against the Lannisters entirely. But the main concern is Sansa. My daughter's life. We have done everything we can think of short of storming the city. If we reject Margaery's overture, we gamble that Joffrey will be appeased by inaction. Everything we've seen suggests he will not. Robb looked around at the men. We cannot remain idle. We have heard rumors that the so-called trial is imminent. Joffrey wants it to be a spectacle. If Margaery can truly intercede or at least delay matters, that might be our best hope. And if, in the process, we help her achieve a shift in power. Catelyn could see the anguish on his face. He was so young to shoulder all of this. Yet he was also Ned Stark's heir, a natural leader shaped by war. He reached a decision quickly, nodding to the council. I will draft a letter to Lady Margaery acknowledging her plan and offering our cautious support. We will not commit forces, but we will pledge not to exploit any unrest in the city so long as Sansa is not harmed. If we can, we'll be ready to whisk her away the moment she's freed. The Greyjohn, Karstark, and Edmure all murmured their assent, though their faces hinted at a swirl of doubt. Quietly, the men filed out of the tent, leaving Catelyn alone with Robb and Grey Wind. The direwolf's ears flicked nervously as though sensing the tension in the air. Catelyn sank onto a wooden stool, the exhaustion of the ride and of the entire war pulling at her bones. We are forging a pact with strangers in the heart of the lion's den, she said softly. Robb crouched beside her, removing his gloves. Yes, but I see little choice. If Margaery can keep Sansa alive and ultimately free her, we owe it to your daughter and to the realm to see this through. Besides, we have fewer and fewer allies. We cannot afford to spurn a potential one. She nodded, touched his hand. You've grown so much, Robb. A flicker of sorrow crossed his face. War forces it, Mother. I only hope it hasn't turned me into something cold. His words echoed in her heart. She remembered the chill that had overtaken her when she drove the dagger into Jaime Lannister. That ice had not thawed even now. Yet she felt it shift ever so slightly, as though the faint warmth of Margaery's letter had offered a glimmer of salvation. Perhaps, if they could save Sansa, there might still be a piece of her heart that was not frozen by grief. She sat there with her son, the quiet enveloping them. Beyond the canvas walls, the camp rustled with distant voices, horses stamping, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The storm clouds of war hung overhead, but at least for a moment, a fragile hope replaced the dread that had consumed her. Whether that hope was grounded in truth or illusion, she could not yet say. 2 days later, a raven flew south bearing Robb's response to Margaery. Catelyn had read over his careful phrasing, a polite acceptance of her entreaty, an affirmation that the North would not strike King's Landing should a certain change in leadership occur, a promise that if Sansa were allowed to flee, they would not hamper Lady Margaery's own ambitions. The letter was ambiguous enough to be explained away if intercepted, but straightforward enough for Margaery to interpret. A delicate dance of words indeed. In the meantime, the realm's chaos only deepened. Messages arrived from the Iron Islands detailing raids on the western shores. The Greyjoys were taking advantage of the fractured realm to carve out more territory for themselves. In the Riverlands, Walder Frey grumbled about the cost of feeding so many troops, while Roose Bolton remained ominously silent in Harrenhal. Rumors reached them that Bolton had confronted small pockets of Lannister men near the fortress and captured a few. Yet no further intelligence had come about his efforts to sow discord in the capital. Catelyn could only hope that in his own calculating way he was working to weaken the Lannisters as promised. Late in the evening, standing near Robb's map table, Catelyn studied the pinned scrawls of potential routes to King's Landing. The plan was that if Margaery's attempt to depose Joffrey succeeded, and if it led to a moment of chaos, they might dispatch a small, swift force to retrieve Sansa. Perhaps ride under false banners, slip in from the Rosby Road or some lesser-known path, or bribe a gate guard. All of it felt like a fragile fantasy. Still, she clung to it. That night, she sat by her tent's little brazier, the coals glowing softly. Brienne lingered at the entrance, arms folded, lost in thought. Catelyn found her steady presence comforting in these uncertain days. Brienne, she said, do you think we are fools to trust Margaery Tyrell? Brienne's blue eyes flickered with the reflection of the coals. I do not know the lady well, but from what I saw in Highgarden, the Tyrells pride themselves on their image of mercy and grace. That does not mean they are not cunning. Yet Lady Margaery did risk much to meet you. I would not call it foolish to hope. Catelyn nodded. Thank you. And for what it's worth, I thank you for standing by me after everything that has happened. Brienne bowed her head. I am sworn to your service, my lady. It means more than you can know. The tall warrior inclined her head once more, then turned to keep her silent vigil, letting Catelyn drift into her own thoughts. There, by the soft crackle of the coals, Catelyn called up the memory of Sansa's bright eyes, her gentle smile, how she used to hum songs in Winterfell's halls. She clung to that memory fiercely, determined that she would not let it end with her daughter on a Lannister executioner's block. A week passed, and tensions at camp ran high. At midday, as Catelyn was speaking with a Tully guard near the horse lines, the horns sounded. 2 short blasts, one for returning outriders, then a single prolonged note. She felt her breath catch. That signal often meant important tidings, or sometimes an approach from an unexpected party. She hurried toward Robb's pavilion, weaving through soldiers who wore anxious expressions. When she arrived, she found Robb with a newly arrived messenger. The man was dusty and drenched in sweat, as though he had ridden hard for days without rest. He gasped for water, which one of Robb's squires hastily provided. At last, he wiped his brow, glancing around at the ring of faces in the pavilion. "Your Grace," he said hoarsely, "I bring word from Harrenhal. Lord Bolton sends this." He produced a folded parchment. Robb broke the seal and scanned the contents with a tight-lipped expression. His eyes darted to Catelyn. Without a word, he handed her the letter. Catelyn read, "Your Grace, I write to inform you that events within the capital are in flux. My envoys in King's Landing suggest the Lannisters do not fully trust the Tyrell alliance. In particular, they grow suspicious of Lady Margaery's overtures of mercy regarding Sansa Stark. Tywin Lannister's men have spread rumors that House Tyrell plots some manner of betrayal. Tensions rise. King Joffrey, however, seems oblivious and is more consumed with the spectacle of a trial. The date of the girl's hearing has been set. It will take place in just under a fortnight, with all the court assembled. The Tyrells are said to be preparing lavish feasts for the same occasion. Whether that portends Margaery's plan to unseat Joffrey or is mere pageantry, I cannot say. My efforts to sow further discord proceed. I shall not commit them to paper, but suffice it to say that certain watchers in the city have begun to ask dangerous questions about the king, his lineage, and the future. If an opportunity arises to strike or to retrieve the girl, it will likely be during the chaos that ensues. Pray that fortune favors us. Respectfully, Roose Bolton, Lieutenant of the Dreadfort, Castellan of Harrenhal." Catelyn's blood ran cold. "A fortnight," she breathed. "We have 2 weeks until this so-called trial begins." Robb nodded grimly. "We must be ready." Karstark let out a sharp breath through his nose. If the Tyrells plan something, it would have to be soon. Joffrey likely wants the trial to coincide with the wedding celebrations, or else to use Sansa's public humiliation as a prelude to the wedding feast. Edmure Tully shook his head in disgust. "Monstrous. How can any realm abide such cruelty?" Catelyn set the letter aside. "So we must prepare for a moment that might never come, and if it does come, it could be a trap or it could slip away in an instant. We cannot move an army so swiftly to the gates of King's Landing." "Exactly," Robb said. "We might need a smaller, covert force waiting nearby, hiding in the forests or in an abandoned holdfast. If Margaery's plan truly unfolds, and the city plunges into confusion, that might be our window. We ride in, seize Sansa, and vanish before Tywin can rally. But it requires perfect timing and absolute secrecy." The Great John grinned fiercely, pounding a fist into his palm. "I like this plan. Bold. It's risky, but so is everything in this damned war." Karstark looked less enthusiastic, but he did not argue. Edmure pursed his lips, half uneasy, half resolved. "We should only commit the best riders," he said. "Men we trust implicitly, men who can handle themselves in tight quarters." Robb nodded. "I'll lead the force personally." Catelyn's heart lurched. "Robb, if you go yourself, you put everything at risk. You are the king in the north. If something happens to you—" He met her gaze firmly. "I cannot, in good conscience, send others to rescue my sister while I remain behind. Besides, the men will fight twice as hard if I lead them, and we will need every advantage." She wanted to protest, but she remembered the look in his eyes when he had spoken of Sansa's plight. She recognized the stubborn will that came from Ned Stark's blood. She swallowed her objections. "Then at least take the best. The Great John, my uncle Edmure, men who know the land around King's Landing. And let me go with you." "No," Robb said it gently but decisively. "You are too important to me, Mother. If something happens to me, you will guide the north. You must. Besides, you're no cavalry rider. A swift, stealthy approach is safer without the Queen Mother of the North as a target. She felt a surge of old frustration, but she could not deny the sense in his words. Still, the idea of watching him ride away into that viper's nest made her stomach clench. I understand, but do not shut me out of the planning. He nodded. I would never. The men moved to the map, leaning over it, marking possible routes toward King's Landing, hidden roads, small ferry crossings, anything that might allow a swift approach from a direction the Lannisters would not suspect. The possibility of a blockade or roving patrols lay heavy on every conversation. Catelyn stood with them until the candles burned low, forging the shape of a daring plan. If the Tyrells did indeed move against Joffrey around the time of Sansa's trial, Robb and his riders would attempt to exploit that upheaval. If the Tyrells did nothing, or if it was all a trap, they would have to retreat. An impossible gamble. Yet no worse than leaving Sansa to the headsman. By the time the council broke, exhaustion draped over them all like a sodden cloak. Catelyn walked away into the chilly night air. She lifted her eyes to the sky, seeing a vast sprinkling of stars. Somewhere far away, Sansa was locked in the Red Keep. She was no soldier, no assassin, no politician. She was just a girl who once dreamed of songs and chivalric love. Catelyn prayed to the old gods and knew that, in 2 weeks' time, this nightmare would end in something other than tragedy. The night before Robb was set to depart with his chosen band of riders, the camp was restless. Catelyn strode through rows of men sharpening swords, stuffing saddle pouches with dried meat, checking tack, whispering in low tones about what might lie ahead. The tension was thick. Though only a small fraction of the army would ride south with the king in the north, the entire camp felt the gravity of the moment. Catelyn found Robb in his tent, standing over a table laden with letters. He was clad in a simple gray shirt, half-laced at the collar, and his hair was damp from a quick wash. Gray wind lay curled near the flap, watchful. When Catelyn entered, Robb looked up from a note he had been writing. I'm leaving instructions for the men remaining here, he said. I want them prepared in case we have to ride north in haste or if Tywin's forces move unexpectedly. Her throat tightened. She nodded, stepping close to him. I understand. He set aside his quill and turned to face her. For a moment, he looked very young again, on the brink of some unknown, like a child about to face his first real challenge. But he had already fought in battles, already tasted the horrors of war. Perhaps this was just the weight of responsibility crushing down on him in a new way. Mother, he said softly, if things go poorly, you must lead. The lords will look to you. You must keep them united. She placed her hands on his shoulders. I will, but do not speak as if you will not return. He smiled sadly. I will do everything in my power to return. Sansa too. She felt tears threatening, but she held them at bay, refusing to burden him with her own fears. Instead, she pressed a kiss to his forehead as she had done when he was a boy. You are the king in the north, she whispered. But you are also my son. Ride swift and true. Remember everything your father taught you. And may the gods guide you home. His eyes shone. I will, mother. At that moment, Edmure Tully ducked through the tent flap. He paused, seeming to sense the intimacy of the scene. His voice, when he spoke, was uncharacteristically gentle. Robb, men are gathering. We're ready to leave at first light. Robb straightened. Thank you, uncle. Is everyone accounted for? Yes. We've handpicked the best. The Grey John is eager. He keeps boasting that he'll smash down the Red Keep gates single-handed. Robb's mouth quirked in amusement. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. We need stealth, not a brawl. With that, Edmure gave a short nod and departed, leaving mother and son alone one last time. Catelyn let out a shaky breath. I will see you off in the morning. Robb touched her hand gently. We will bring her back. She could only nod, words failing her. Then she turned and left, not trusting herself to speak again without breaking into sobs. Outside, the night air felt brutally cold. She wrapped her cloak tightly around her, walking with quick steps back to her own tent. Brienne awaited her, but Catelyn could hardly speak. They exchanged only a few words before Catelyn tried to sleep. The hours passed in fitful rest, half-dreams of Sansa's face, of Jaime Lannister's blood, of Ned's head upon a spike. She woke with a start more than once, the lantern's flame flickering, sending shadows over the canvas walls. Somehow dawn arrived. Robb and his chosen riders assembled in the central clearing of the encampment. They numbered perhaps 200. Not a great host, but large enough to defend themselves if ambushed. The plan was to ride hard toward a remote corner of the Crownlands, well away from the main roads, then circle in to hide in forests near the Rosby route. From there, they would rely on coded signals from Marjorie Tyrell's watchers if all went well. Catelyn stood with a host of lords and soldiers to watch them off. She forced herself to maintain a regal bearing, her face composed. Robb wore simple mail beneath his cloak, his Stark crown strapped to the saddle. He would not ride openly as a king in full regalia, but every man who followed him knew who he was. The great Jon beamed with a mixture of excitement and pride. Edmure Tully looked tense, fiddling with the hilt of his sword. Roose Bolton was still absent, but a few of his knights had joined the expedition. No sign of Fry Manu. Walder Frey had only grudgingly contributed a handful of crossbowmen who would remain behind. Catelyn could not decide if that was a blessing or curse. When all were mounted, Robb guided his horse to the edge of the clearing, near where she waited. He looked down at her, eyes filled with love and determination. "I'll come back," he said, his voice low so that only she might hear. "With Sansa." She reached up and gripped his gloved hand. "I believe you." He released her hand and signaled the column forward. Hooves churned the wet earth, steel clinked, and the men rode out. Dust and cold morning breath rose around them. Catelyn watched until they vanished beyond the ridge, her chest tight. Then she closed her eyes and prayed silently, calling on every god in heaven to watch over her children. The days that followed felt torturously long. The main army stayed encamped near the Riverlands border, prepared to move or hold as needed. Scouts scoured the region for any sign of Tywin's forces, but word came back that he was still in King's Landing, orchestrating the city's defense and preparing for the grand event of Joffrey's trial and the wedding that was meant to follow. Catelyn thought bitterly that only the Lannisters could combine a wedding with a show trial for a captive girl. She tried to bury herself in tasks that needed doing, mediating disputes between northern soldiers and Riverland villagers, corresponding with Riverrun about supplies, even hearing out some of Walder Frey's endless gripes about his crossing. All the while, her thoughts returned to Sansa and to Robb's small band that had slipped away into the Crownlands. She wondered if they had found a safe hiding place yet, if they had encountered patrols, if Marjorie's watchers had been able to reach them. No new ravens arrived from King's Landing or from Roose Bolton. The silence was maddening. At night, Catelyn would walk the perimeter of the camp with Brienne at her side, glimpsing the flickering torches against the dark horizon, imagining that beyond the blackness lay the Red Keep, where her daughter awaited a trial that could end her life. On the 6th day after Robb's departure, a rider arrived bearing a cryptic note from Harrenhal. Catelyn read it with a pounding heart. The words were sparse. Lady Stark, a flurry of activity in the capital. Whispers that the trial is scheduled within 3 days. The Tyrells are said to be preparing a large feast on the same night. Our watchers see movement of additional troops within the city, but cannot discern friend from foe. No sign of your son. Perhaps that is good. If the Tyrell plan unfolds, it will be soon. A servant of Lord Bolton. Catelyn pressed her lips together, reread the note twice, then burned it in a candle flame, as the messenger recommended. 3 days. If the trial was indeed so soon, Robb and his men would be in position, braced for the signal that might never come. She could only imagine how tense each night must be for him, lurking in some wood or half-ruined village, scanning for any sign from Marjorie's people. Time crawled. On the 2nd day, no word came. On the 3rd, still no raven arrived. By then, the entire encampment was on edge, expecting some news, good or ill. Catelyn barely slept, pacing as the hours waned. The day of Sansa's trial had arrived, if the note was correct. She pictured the Red Keep's throne room, thronged with lords, the Golden Lion banners overshadowing the dire wolf. She pictured Joffrey's smug face, the glint of a headsman's axe. She shuddered. Night fell in a haze of dread. Catelyn sat in her tent, Brienne standing quietly. They spoke in hushed tones, going in circles about every possible outcome until both fell silent, staring at the flickering lantern. Sleep was impossible. Catelyn closed her eyes and saw only nightmares. At some point in the darkest hours, she jerked upright at the sound of frantic voices outside. Brienne drew her sword, stepping to the tent flap. Catelyn's heart hammered. She heard men shouting, "A raven, a raven." Swiftly, she scrambled from her cot, pulling on a cloak over her nightdress. Brienne lifted the tent flap and a messenger burst in, panting, eyes wide. "My lady, a raven arrived, urgent message from the capital." Catelyn's entire body went cold. "Give it to me." The messenger's hands trembled as he extended the scroll. She seized it, her eyes flicking to Brienne. The tall knight stood close, as though ready to defend her from whatever blow might come next. Catelyn's fingers shook as she broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. Her eyes swept the lines hungrily. To the camp of the king in the north. By the grace of the gods, your sister Sansa Stark lives, though battered by this ordeal. Joffrey Baratheon is dead, struck down in a sudden flurry of chaos at the height of the trial. Blame for the deed is being cast in every direction. Some whisper poison, others a hidden blade. Lord Tywin remains in command of the city, though the Tyrells have seized this chance to press for Tommen's coronation. Sansa vanished in the tumult, aided, we believe, by a band of armed men in Stark livery. Rumor says they fled northeast through the city's lesser gates. Lord Tywin is incensed and has sent gold cloaks to pursue them. The city is in uproar. Tommen is to be crowned. The Tyrells feign horror at the murder. If these tidings reach you, know that your son has accomplished what some deemed impossible, but the danger is great. Troops scour the roads, and I fear they will not escape without cunning. Harrenhal awaits more news. I remain at my post. An informant in King's Landing. Catelyn's legs nearly buckled. She gripped Brienne's arm, reading the message again. Joffrey Baratheon was dead. Sansa was free, rescued by men in Stark livery, almost certainly Robb and his party. They were fleeing northeast, pursued by gold cloaks. The city was in chaos. She let out a gasp that hovered somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Joffrey is dead, she said numbly. They have Sansa. They're on the run. Brienne's eyes widened, and then a smile flickered, brief and fierce. They did it, she murmured. Catelyn nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She read the lines again. Joffrey struck down in chaos. The trial must have erupted into mayhem. How? Had Margaery facilitated it? Had Robb's men done the deed? The letter did not say. All that mattered now was that Sansa was free, that Joffrey's cruelty was ended. Yet they were pursued, and Tywin would move heaven and earth to capture them. Her daughter was still in mortal peril. She drew in a ragged breath, trying to think clearly. We must help them. If they're fleeing northeast, they might aim for the Rosby Road or the God's Eye route. We have to send riders. We can't just wait here. She stepped out of the tent, the messenger trailing, and found the camp already stirring. Men in Stark colors crowded around, desperate to learn the news. Someone had shouted that the king was dead, that the princess was saved. Rumors ran wild. She saw Edmure Tully approaching, clad in a half-fastened tunic, hair awry. Sister, what have you learned? She held up the parchment. They're alive, but Joffrey is dead and Tywin is after them. We need to get them out of the Crownlands before Tywin's men close every road. Edmure nodded rapidly. I'll gather riders, a swift sortie. We can meet them halfway. The Grey John, half-dressed, appeared, face alight with fierce joy. So that damned boy king is ended? Ha! The gods are good. Let's ride, my lady. We'll carve a path if need be. Catelyn almost smiled, but fear tightened her throat. We must be swift and cunning, Grey John. Tywin will have outriders and scouts. He grinned. Then we'll smash them. They had no time for elaborate strategies. Within the hour, a company of nearly 300 mounted men assembled, led by Edmure Tully, the Great John, and a handful of veterans who knew the region. Catelyn would remain behind once again. Her place was to hold the camp and keep the remainder of the army intact. But she insisted on being kept informed at every turn. Dawn's first light broke over the horizon as the cavalry thundered out. Catelyn stood on a small rise, shivering despite the cloak around her shoulders, watching the dust kicked up by their departure. At her side, Brienne asked softly, "Will your son make it?" Catelyn swallowed past the lump in her throat. "He has to." Robb Stark spurred his horse through the dim forest path, branches whipping at him from all sides, mud splattering the legs of his mount. Behind him, Sansa clung to a saddlebow in front of one of the Stark riders, pale and trembling but alive. The rest of the men formed a tight column, hearts pounding. The night's events still reverberated in their minds, like the echo of a thunderclap. They had slipped into King's Landing in small groups, wearing ragged cloaks to hide their mail. Margaery's watchers had led them through deserted alleys, smuggled them into a half-abandoned stable near the Red Keep's walls, all under cover of darkness. Then came the day of Sansa's trial. The plan was to wait for a signal. They had expected perhaps a distraction or a sudden riot. None had anticipated Joffrey's sudden seizure and collapse. One moment, the Boy King stood on a dais, crowing about Sansa's guilt, demanding she confess to regicide, Ned Stark's treachery, and the murder of Jaime. The next, he clutched at his throat, purple-faced, frothing at the mouth, and collapsed. Chaos erupted. Some screamed poison. Others drew steel. Tywin Lannister leapt to secure the dais. The Kingsguard erupted in shouts. The Tyrells stood aghast, though Margaery's face, seen from a distance, had remained astonishingly calm. In that swirl of confusion, Robb's men had made their move, shattering a side door, fighting through stunned gold cloaks, reaching Sansa before anyone could stop them. He remembered the moment he spotted her, trembling in the shadow of the Iron Throne where Joffrey had tried to drag her forth. He shouted her name, and when she turned, tears shining in her eyes, he felt a surge of protective fury. They fought their way out, swords flashing. One of Robb's men took a crossbow bolt to the chest but kept going. Another was cut down by a Lannister halberd. Yet they reached the courtyard, leapt onto horses procured by Marjorie's watchers, and galloped through the city streets, weaving around stampeding crowds that poured out to see the commotion at the Red Keep. At the Mudgate, they faced one last guard post. A Tyrell soldier was there, perhaps in on the plan, perhaps merely indifferent. The gate was left momentarily ajar, and they burst out in a thunder of hooves, disappearing into the tangle of shanties outside the walls. By dawn, they were halfway along the Rosby Road, but the gold cloaks pursued them close on their heels. Twice that morning they had skirmishes on narrow lanes, losing more men, though the pursuers also fell. Now they needed to put as many leagues between themselves and King's Landing as possible. Robb risked a glance over his shoulder. Sansa rode between two of his best men. Her copper hair whipped around her face, and though her cheeks were streaked with tears, her eyes shone with a wild intensity, fear, relief, disbelief all at once. He yelled to her, "Hold on, Sansa." She nodded, though the wind tore his voice away. They had to reach friendly territory, or at least get within range of an allied force. If they could rendezvous with the Northmen Edmure was sending, they might stand a chance. Otherwise, Tywin's outriders would pin them down eventually. The roads around the Crownlands were riddled with Lannister loyalists. For now, all they could do was ride. Catelyn paced at the edge of the encampment. Messengers came and went, each bearing fragments of news, most unverified. One claimed that Joffrey had been stabbed by a dwarf, another said he was choked by a pie. The swirl of rumor was maddening. All that mattered was that he was dead and that Sansa and Robb were fleeing for their lives. At midday, a scout galloped in, breathless. "My lady, we sighted dust clouds to the east, might be 2 or 3 leagues out. Could be them. Could be Lannisters too. Hard to say." She whipped around to Brienne. "Call the men to readiness. If Robb and Sansa come through that pass, they must see we're here to protect them." Brienne hurried away, summoning captains and knights. Men grabbed spears and swords, forming ranks. No one knew if they would be called to fight or if the approaching riders were friend or foe. Catelyn's heart pounded. She stood on a small rise with a vantage across the gently sloping fields. The sky was painfully clear, the sun bright on turning leaves. A second scout arrived a short while later, waving from afar. Catelyn's entire body tensed. As he rode up, sweat streaming from his brow, he shouted, "They're coming. I saw Stark banners at the head, a small group. They're being chased. At least 100 gold cloaks, maybe more." A ripple of energy went through the camp. Catelyn's cheeks felt hot, adrenaline surging through her veins. She glanced at the great Jon, who had remained behind to help defend the camp. He let out a warlike roar, calling men to mount. She saw cavalry forming swiftly, spurring their horses into lines. Banners snapped in the wind. She turned to a guard. "My horse, bring it now." The guard hesitated. "My lady, it might be dangerous. I have to be there." Her voice brooked no argument. Moments later, she was astride a sturdy mare, Brienne right beside her, the tall woman's hand tight on her reins. A small escort ringed them. They rode out from the camp at a brisk canter, then a gallop, heading toward the dust cloud in the east. As they crested a rise, she saw them, a ragged line of riders in Stark colors racing across a stretch of open ground. The Lannister pursuers followed close behind, pikes glinting. The distance between the two groups was dangerously small. Arrows whistled occasionally, faintly audible from where she rode. The Greyjoy's horns bellowed, echoing across the fields. On that signal, more Stark cavalry thundered out from behind a low ridge, cutting sideways across the chase. The gold cloaks, caught off guard, tried to wheel their horses. But the great Jon and his men smashed into them, steel flashing in the sun, an explosion of war cries and metal shrieks. The Lannister line buckled. Robb's battered column seized the chance to break free, shifting direction toward the north, away from the chaotic melee. Catelyn urged her mare forward, ignoring the pounding of her heart, searching the mass of riders for Robb or Sansa. The clash of swords resounded, the smell of sweat and blood filling the air. She glimpsed the great Jon swinging a colossal two-handed axe, carving a path through the gold cloaks. She heard men shouting for the king in the north, a cry answered by screams of Lannister men. Then, from the swirling dust, she saw Robb's horse emerge, his face streaked with dirt and blood. Behind him rode 2 Stark knights supporting a cloaked figure, Sansa, slumped in the saddle as though exhausted beyond measure. Catelyn felt a sob well in her throat. They were alive, they had made it this far. She kicked her horse to meet them, Brienne flanking her. Robb reined in. He was breathing hard, his eyes wide, as if still half in battle. Cuts ran along his left arm, his armor dented in places. But he was upright, alert. Catelyn guided her mare close enough to see Sansa's face, tear-streaked and pale, eyes dazed. A bruise marred her cheek. Her wrists were raw and red as if from manacles. Catelyn's heart clenched at the sight. "Sansa," she said, voice breaking as she reached for her daughter's hand. Sansa stared for an instant as though not quite believing, then let out a sobbing gasp. "Mother." She nearly toppled from the saddle, but Robb and one of the knights steadied her. Catelyn dismounted as quickly as she could, hands trembling, and caught Sansa around the waist. The girl's legs gave out the moment she touched the ground. She clung to Catelyn, sobbing uncontrollably. He was going to," he said, Sansa managed between ragged breaths. "Joffrey wanted me dead, I thought." "Shoo," Catelyn murmured, cupping her daughter's head, feeling her hair damp with sweat. "You're safe. Robb saved you. You're safe." Tears blurred her own vision. She pressed Sansa's face against her shoulder, holding her as if she might vanish at any moment. Robb slid from his horse, breathing in sharp, shallow gasps. He surveyed the battlefield behind them where the Greyjoy's cavalry still clashed with the Gold Cloaks. The Lannisters were outnumbered now, and many had begun to retreat or throw down their weapons, but the fighting was brutal. "We need to get her back to camp," he said, "where she'll be safe." Catelyn nodded, helping Sansa remain upright. The girl's entire body trembled with shock. Her dress was torn and dusty, and bruises mottled her arms. Catelyn felt a surge of white-hot anger. Joffrey must have tormented her or had her beaten. Or perhaps the Lannister guards had done so. Rage tore at her heart, but she pushed it down, focusing on her daughter's safety. Brienne took charge in a calm, steady tone. "We'll put her on your horse, my lady. Then I'll lead it gently back to camp. Your Grace, do you require a fresh horse?" Robb gritted his teeth, scanning the fray. "We should ensure the Gold Cloaks are routed or taken prisoner. I can't leave them behind us to regroup. You two go. I'll help the Great John." Catelyn's eyes flicked from the swirling dust clouds of battle to Robb's tense posture. "Be careful, Robb. You've done enough." He shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "It won't take long. We're nearly done." Catelyn could not argue further. She had to get Sansa away from the carnage. She nodded, and together with Brienne, she eased Sansa onto the mare. The girl clung to the saddle, eyes darting around in terror. Catelyn mounted behind her, wrapping an arm securely around her waist. Brienne took the reins and led them back toward the camp at a cautious pace, mindful that Sansa was one jolt away from fainting. As they rode, Sansa's breathing steadied a little, though she shivered violently. Catelyn murmured small reassurances, pressing a kiss to her temple, tears still hot on her cheeks. It felt surreal, holding her daughter after so long. She remembered the last time she had seen Sansa back in Winterfell, with everything so different. So many heartbreaks had followed. Yet here she was, alive. When they finally reached the outer perimeter of the camp, soldiers rushed forward to help. They guided the horse to Catelyn's tent area where healers and camp followers gathered. Catelyn dismounted carefully, supporting Sansa's weight. The girl's legs gave out again, and she had to lean heavily on her mother. "It's all right," Catelyn said softly, guiding her toward a cot. "Just sit, rest." Sansa blinked, her lashes wet. I can't believe it. Everything happened so fast." Joffrey was choking, turning purple. Then there was fighting. Robb appeared like a dream. "I thought I was going to die." Catelyn pressed her lips together, tears threatening once more. "You're safe now, my sweet girl. No one will harm you here." Healers approached, gently tending to her bruises, bringing water and a cloth to wash the grime from her face. Sansa winced at every touch. Catelyn hovered close, one hand on her daughter's arm, offering whatever small comfort she could. Somewhere behind them, Brienne stood watch, scanning the camp with a protective glare. Catelyn noticed the tall knight's expression, relief mingling with a fierce vigilance. She was grateful beyond words for Brienne's loyalty. Nearby, men gawked and whispered. News must be spreading like wildfire. Sansa Stark freed from the Lannisters. Joffrey Baratheon dead. A swirl of rumor and excitement engulfed the camp, but Catelyn tuned it out, focusing on her child. Finally, after a few moments, Sansa sagged onto the cot, exhaustion overtaking her. Catelyn brushed hair from her brow, murmuring, "Try to rest." Sansa gave a small nod, eyes fluttering shut. Her breathing slowed, though she trembled sporadically like a frightened animal. Catelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. This was the moment she had prayed for. Sansa was free. Yet she knew the war was far from over. Tywin Lannister would not let Joffrey's killing go unanswered. By late afternoon, the Grecians' forces returned with captives in tow and spoils from the gold cloaks who had surrendered. The stragglers from King's Landing had been scattered. Robb came back at their head, looking haggard and drawn, his injuries caked in dried blood. The camp burst into cheers when they saw him. A wave of raw triumph swept the Northmen, for a great injustice had been righted, or so it seemed to them. Catelyn stood outside her tent as he approached. She saw the slump in his shoulders, the stiff way he climbed down from his horse. His men patted his back, praising him as the man who had rescued his sister and struck a blow at the Lannisters. Robb barely acknowledged them, scanning the crowd until he spotted her. She hurried forward, parted the throng of soldiers, and embraced him, mindful of his wounds. "You did it," she whispered, voice breaking. "You saved her." He exhaled, leaning against her for a moment in weary relief. "She's all right?" Catelyn nodded. "Bruised, shaken, but alive. Sleeping now." He closed his eyes briefly. "Thank the gods." The great John stomped over, a grin splitting his bearded face. "Ha! Another victory for the king in the north. I say we hoist the Lannister lions over a fire next." Robb mustered a wan smile. "I'll leave that to the cooks." Men around them laughed, though the laughter carried an edge. Everyone understood that Tywin Lannister would soon respond. For the moment, though, relief reigned. Catelyn gestured for Robb to follow her inside the tent, away from prying eyes. He complied, stepping inside, where a small brazier burned and Sansa lay resting behind a partition. Brienne guarded the interior, arms folded. Robb set aside his sword belt, letting it clatter against the floor. He sighed, sinking onto a camp chair. He shook his head slightly, as if still reeling from everything. "Joffrey, it was poison, I think. One of Marjorie's people might have done it. Or the Queen of Thorns, her grandmother. I'm not certain. But the instant he fell, it turned to mayhem. We took our chance." Catelyn nodded. "I saw that in the Raven's account. Did you kill him?" Robb's gaze flicked up. "No. When I reached Sansa, he was already gasping his last. Purple-faced, choking. Gods be good, it was not a pleasant sight. But I can't pretend I mourn him." She took his hand, a silent moment passing between them. Then she asked softly, "What of Tywin? Did you see him? Does he know it was us?" A humorless laugh escaped Robb's lips. "He must suspect. Our swords were drawn in the throne room, though the chaos might mask who truly orchestrated it. The Tyrells will pretend innocence, but Tywin will see their hands in it. This might drive a wedge between them, exactly what we wanted. But it's also going to make him furious. If Joffrey is truly gone, Tywin may redouble his war efforts to avenge him." Catelyn's stomach tightened. "But you have your sister. Whatever else happens, we have that. And Tommen is presumably the next boy king. Another child puppet for Tywin." Robb nodded. "So it seems. But for now, Joffrey's cruelty is over. That must count for something." He rubbed his brow, wincing at a bruise near his temple. She realized he was on the verge of collapse. "Robb, you must rest. Let the healers see to your injuries." He did not protest. Exhaustion weighed down every movement. "Yes, I just want to look in on Sansa first." They rose and stepped behind the cloth partition, where Sansa slept fitfully on a cot. An elderly camp follower dabbed her forehead with a damp cloth. She stirred, eyelashes fluttering, and slowly woke. When she saw Robb, her expression flickered through a riot of emotions. Disbelief, relief, joy, guilt. "Sansa," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. She tried to sit up, but wincing, sank back onto the thin pillow. "Robb, you saved me." Her voice wavered. I didn't think you'd come." A gentle smile curved his lips. "I'm sorry I took so long." She reached out, and he took her hand, tears gathering in both their eyes. Catelyn stood by, unable to speak for the knot in her throat. This was the reunion she had feared might never come. A fleeting moment of solace in a realm drowned in blood. After a few moments, Sansa's eyes drifted to the ceiling. "Mother told me Arya is missing, that she was lost in the city somewhere, or on the road." Robb nodded, voice thick. "We don't know exactly. Some say she was seen in the Riverlands with a band of outlaws. We can't be certain." Sansa's face creased in pain. "Oh, Arya, I hope she's safe." Catelyn stepped forward, smoothing Sansa's hair gently. "One day we will find her. We'll all be together again. It felt like an almost impossible promise, yet she clung to it. If they could save Sansa, who was once at the heart of Joffrey's power, then perhaps there was hope for Arya, too. Sansa's eyelids drooped, exhaustion overwhelming her. She slipped back into a restless sleep. Robb exhaled, some of the tension slipping from his posture. He pressed a kiss to her brow, then rose. I'll go let the healers see to my arm. Then I'll sleep for a year. Catelyn touched his shoulder. Thank you, Robb. You did what no one else could. His eyes shone with a complicated mix of pride and sorrow. A king protects his people. And my family. Then he left, limping slightly, leaving Catelyn alone with her daughter and the still buzzing fear of what might come next. The following days brought a flood of tidings. Ravens from all directions confirmed that King Joffrey was dead and Tommen Baratheon, his younger brother, was proclaimed king in King's Landing. Lord Tywin took up the mantle of hand once again, though Margaery Tyrell's influence on the boy king was evidently strong. Many wondered who truly ruled behind the scenes. An outrider reported that thousands of gold cloaks still searched the Crownlands for Robb's band, but after the Greyjoy's intervention, Tywin's forces had retreated closer to the city. It seemed likely he would marshal a larger army for a renewed campaign. Word also came that Stannis Baratheon stirred once more in the Stormlands, undeterred by his defeat at the Blackwater. The realm teetered, uncertain who would come out on top. In the Northmen's camp, celebrations mingled with tension. The successful rescue of Sansa won Robb even greater devotion from his men. The Greyjoy boasted that no one could stand against the king in the north. Yet the war was not over. Tywin's wrath loomed large. But for a brief window, they could breathe. Sansa's recovery was slow. The physical bruises faded quickly, but she startled at every shout, trembled at any mention of King's Landing. When Catelyn tried to ask about her time as Joffrey's captive, tears would fill her eyes and she would shake her head, unable to speak. Catelyn recognized the signs of deep trauma. She did not press further, instead offering gentle reassurances and leaving her with the healers or with Brienne, who took on the role of personal guard. One afternoon, Sansa ventured out of the tent, arms wrapped around herself. She watched men sparring in the distance, her eyes flicking over the scuffed ground. Catelyn joined her, placing a cautious hand on her shoulder. The girl stiffened slightly, then glanced at her mother. A small, sad smile ghosted across her lips. I don't know where I belong anymore, she murmured. I can't go back to King's Landing. And sometimes I still miss it. The comforts, the songs, the festivals. Everything was a lie, but it felt so grand. Catelyn's heart ached. That place was never truly your home. You belong with us, with your family. In the north, once we reclaim it. Sansa nodded, though her eyes remained distant. I hope we can go there soon. I want to see Bran and Rickon again. Catelyn's breath caught. Yes. One day. She prayed the boys remained safe at Winterfell. News from the north was scarce. The Ironborn had attacked the coasts, and the Bolton men were allegedly re-establishing control in certain regions. Everything was uncertain. Sansa gazed at a battered sparring post, lost in thought. I never thought Jaime Lannister would die. I heard how you killed him, Mother. People said it was vengeance. Did that vengeance help anything? Catelyn felt a twist of guilt, recalling the thick warmth of Jaime's blood on her hands. She struggled to find words. It didn't bring back Ned, nor did it guarantee your freedom. But at the time, I believed we had no other way. The Lannisters would never have returned you, no matter how we bargained with Jaime. So I took from them the chance to toy with our hopes. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was the only way I knew. Sansa lowered her gaze. I understand. After what Joffrey did, I feel as if all the songs about gallant knights were lies. Sometimes I even hate them. But then I remember Ser Dantos or Lady Margaery's kindness, and I'm confused. Catelyn gently touched Sansa's cheek. War is confusing. Honor and cruelty side by side. We must hold on to what's good where we find it. Sansa nodded, tears in her eyes, and accepted Catelyn's quiet embrace. Together, they watched the men train, the clang of steel echoing in the crisp air. One evening, a small delegation arrived, Roose Bolton and a handful of his men, along with a captive, the minor Lannister cousin who had been taken in the earlier skirmish. Bolton rode in at the head, pale eyes scanning the camp as though assessing its readiness. He dismounted gracefully, greeted by Robb and Catelyn. Bolton offered a thin smile. Your Grace, my lady. I see Sansa Stark has returned to her family. Congratulations. His tone was almost dispassionate, as if he were discussing a shipment of grain, but a gleam in his gaze suggested he recognized the import of what had happened. Robb inclined his head curtly. Lord Bolton, We owe thanks for your information from Harrenhal. It aided us in planning. Bolton gave a slight bow, eyes sliding to Sansa, who stood nearby, half hidden behind her mother. My lady, I'm glad you were safe. The city is abuzz with rumors of your rescue. Sansa offered the barest nod as though uncomfortable under his scrutiny. He turned back to Robb. I bring news. Tywin Lannister consolidates his power in King's Landing, as you know, but he also calls banners from the Westerlands and the Crownlands. Word is he intends to press a campaign to crush us definitively. With Joffrey gone, he needs a new show of force. Robb's jaw tightened. So the war continues. Will the Tyrells stand with him? Or do you see cracks in their alliance? A ghost of a smile touched Bolton's lips. It's complicated. They are forging new ties with Tywin to secure Tommen's throne, but there is tension. Margaery Tyrell is now betrothed to Tommen. Her power grows, and her grandmother, the Queen of Thorns, manipulates court factions. Tywin cannot simply dismiss them. Still, to outward appearances, the crown remains united enough to continue the war. Catelyn felt a stir of anxiety. And what of the rumors that Margaery or her kin arranged Joffrey's death? Bolton shrugged. The rumors persist, but none dare speak openly. Tywin chooses not to push the issue, perhaps because it would risk fracturing his alliance with the Tyrells. Instead, they blame the chaos on Stark assassins. Indeed, your son's presence in the throne room at the time was no secret. Robb snorted. Convenient. Bolton's tone was bland. Yes, quite. But for all that, it does not matter. War is war, and Tywin will not rest until we are subdued or he is forced into terms. Catelyn saw Robb's lips press into a firm line. Then let him come. We have made alliances of our own. We hold the Riverlands still, and if the Vale or the Iron Islands keep him distracted, so much the better. Bolton's pale gaze flicked to the minor Lannister cousin who stood in chains behind him. In the meantime, I brought you another bargaining chip, though we see how that fared last time. Nevertheless, perhaps this man might serve some political end. Or amuse you. Catelyn bristled at the edge in Bolton's voice. She recalled too well the fiasco with Jaime. But that was in the past. Still, she forced a measured tone. We have no desire to amuse ourselves with pointless cruelty. We do what must be done. Bolton inclined his head. Of course. She regarded him warily, uncertain whether he was mocking her. Yet he said no more on the subject, and the conversation turned to the logistics of fortifying positions along the Trident. Later, in private, she told Robb that she did not trust Bolton, that something in his eyes chilled her. Robb, warned by the war and the loss of men, simply sighed. We need his forces, and he has given us no cause to break with him openly. Catelyn did not argue, though unease gnawed at her. Bolton's involvement in Harrenhal, his cunning manipulations, it all reeked of something that could turn on them if they were not careful. Yet for the moment, the victory of Sansa's rescue overshadowed these doubts. They would address them soon enough. The days passed, the army reorganizing. Scouts reported Tywin gathering forces near King's Landing. Some men clamored for Robb to press forward and sack the Westerlands, to draw Tywin away from the capital. Others argued for a defensive stance, letting the crown spend itself against the Riverlands. Catelyn watched from the sidelines, offering counsel where she could, her primary concern the safety of her daughter. Sansa still flinched at sudden noises, but her color improved, and she began to eat more. She asked often about Arya, about Bran and Rickon, about the possibility of returning to Winterfell. Each time, Catelyn's heart ached to tell her that all would be well, but she could only answer with measured optimism. One night, when a chill wind blew through the encampment, Sansa woke from a nightmare, calling out. Catelyn hurried to her side, finding her trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. She clutched a thin blanket around her shoulders. It's all right, Catelyn murmured, gathering her in a hug. It was only a dream. Sansa's breath hitched. He was laughing, Joffrey, and he said you were all dead, and I was alone. Catelyn stroked her hair. He's gone. He cannot harm you again. Sansa pressed her face against her mother's shoulder, shuddering. I hate him. I hate what he did, how he made me feel. Sometimes I dream I'm the one who killed him. Catelyn's heart twisted. He brought out the worst in everyone he touched. Let the memory of him fade. My sweet girl, we have your future to build. Sansa inhaled shakily, as though trying to gather courage. I'll try. After that, the girl settled, drifting back into a fitful sleep. Catelyn remained at her side, listening to her soft breathing. She thought of Jaime Lannister's last moments, how her own fury had driven her to kill. Would Sansa live with a similar torment if she had been the one to strike Joffrey down? Perhaps it was for the best that he had perished by some other hand. The thirst for vengeance could be a venomous thing. On the 8th day after Sansa's return, a raven arrived from King's Landing under Tywin's seal. It was addressed to the so-called King in the North, and the wording was formal and cold. It denounced Robb Stark for the murder of King Joffrey, demanded the return of Sansa Stark to face her lawful punishment, and threatened retribution if the North did not surrender forthwith. There was no mention of Jaime Lannister's death. Perhaps it was overshadowed by the drama of Joffrey's demise. The letter ended by reminding them that the new King Tommen Baratheon sought peace, but only on the condition of Stark's submission. Robb had read it aloud in the command tent. When he finished, he crumpled the parchment in one hand, eyes like flint. The gathered lords looked to him, brimming with anger and scorn. "Return Sansa?" roared the great Jon. "They can pry her from our cold dead fingers, and we'd still take a dozen of their heads." Roose Bolton's pale face was unreadable. Edmure Tully spat the gall of Tywin. He knows the truth or suspects it that the Tyrells killed Joffrey, but he's using this to stoke the realm's hatred of the North. Robb tossed the crumpled parchment onto the table. "So be it. We will not yield. We will not trade my sister for empty words." Ricard Karstark nodded grimly. "The lines are drawn." Catelyn, standing beside Robb, felt a surge of fury at Tywin's arrogance. The man who orchestrated Ned's downfall, who turned a blind eye to Joffrey's cruelties, now demanded Sansa's return. It was laughable if it were not so dangerous. She took a breath, pushing aside the anger to focus on what was needed now: strategy. "We knew this was coming," she said quietly. "Tywin will march north, or at least try to lure us south again. Our priority remains protecting Sansa and the rest of our family. If Tywin wants a war, then we must be ready." The men agreed, and the council dissolved into a flurry of planning. They would remain near the Riverlands for now, fortifying strategic positions and preparing for a possible Lannister offensive. Meanwhile, scouts would watch the roads near Harrenhal and the Blackwater for any sign of Tywin's approach. Sansa, hearing of the letter, asked quietly whether she was the cause of yet more conflict. Catelyn wrapped her in a gentle embrace, telling her it was never her fault. They were at war long before Sansa's name was ever on Tywin's lips. Still, she could see the guilt weigh on her daughter. The scars Joffrey had inflicted ran deep. As the crisp days of autumn advanced, the Stark forces braced for the next phase of the war. The nights grew longer, the wind chillier. From time to time, crows wheeled overhead, cawing as they soared above tents and cook fires. Some of the men muttered that winter would soon arrive in earnest, making travel and war more punishing for both sides. Others took solace in that, believing the North was better prepared for winter than the South. Catelyn spent many evenings by the brazier in her tent, Sansa reading or sewing quietly while outside men told stories of battles and feuds. The girl seemed calmer in these moments, though her eyes would still dart anxiously at any unexpected noise. Often, Robb would join them briefly, recounting the day's meetings or sharing small jokes to lighten the mood. The presence of mother, son, and daughter together felt like a fragile bubble of warmth in a cold world. One late afternoon, Brienne appeared at the tent flap, announcing that Margaery Tyrell's envoy had arrived. Catelyn's heart skipped. She had not expected more communication from Margaery, not after Joffrey's death. Was this a trap or some new proposition? She rose, instructing Sansa to remain in the tent, then followed Brienne out. By the picket lines, a single rider waited. An older woman in plain traveling clothes. She bowed with surprising grace, introducing herself as Colleen, a lady's maid in the service of Margaery Tyrell. Robb, alerted to her presence, arrived as well, flanked by the great Jon and a few guards. Colleen produced a small sealed letter from a saddlebag. Lady Margaery sends her regards and her gratitude for removing a cruel thorn from the realm's side. She regrets the manner of Joffrey's demise overshadowed your role in freeing Lady Sansa, but she credits you nonetheless. She also writes that tensions in King's Landing remain high. Tywin Lannister consolidates power around the new king, Tommen. Lady Margaery suggests that if a negotiated peace is possible, she might serve as an intermediary. Robb arched an eyebrow. A negotiated peace? Does Tywin share that sentiment? His last letter threatened war. Colleen dipped her head. Lord Tywin uses threats, But Lady Marjorie believes that if you have Sansa and if your position is strong, Tywin may agree to certain terms to avoid further bloodshed, perhaps even recognition of the North's independence or a compromise short of it. Tommen is pliable. Marjorie's influence grows daily. Catelyn exchanged a look with Robb. The idea of a compromise seemed tempting if it would spare more death. But after everything that had happened, the beheading of Ned, the torment of Sansa, the manifold betrayals, trusting Tywin's mercy felt like a fool's gambit. Still, Marjorie's role as Tommen's future queen might be a wedge. Robb cleared his throat. We appreciate Lady Marjorie's offer. We will consider any genuine proposal for peace that respects our sovereignty and ensures the safety of our family. But we need proof of Tywin's sincerity. Colleen smiled politely. I will convey your words. Lady Marjorie also wishes to inquire about Lady Sansa's well-being, if she is. She's well enough, Catelyn said softly. We are grateful to your lady for her help, whether direct or indirect. Colleen bowed again, then asked for permission to rest before departing, which Robb granted. As she was led away to the guest tents, Catelyn turned to her son. What do you think? Robb exhaled slowly. I think Marjorie is shrewd. She sees a chance to shape the realm in her family's favor. If that means forging peace with the North, perhaps she'll push Tywin to yield something. But do I believe Tywin will truly let us break away? Or let us keep Sansa safe without some heavy price? Doubtful. Catelyn nodded. Agreed. But perhaps we can stall him, buy time, or glean more advantages. We remain precarious, especially with our supply lines. Robb stared over the tents, the wind rustling his hair. Let's see what Marjorie proposes. If it's nonsense, we continue to fortify. And if Tywin does march, we'll be ready. A faint sense of déjà vu gripped Catelyn. Time and again, they had tried to negotiate with the Lannisters only to find betrayal and heartbreak. Now, ironically, the impetus for peace came from Marjorie Tyrell, the young woman who had soared in influence after Joffrey's death. It was as if the Game of Thrones had shifted around them, new pieces moving across the board. That night, Sansa joined the council for a short time. Robb had invited her, wanting her to see the shape of the war that had so cruelly impacted her life. She looked nervous but determined, wearing a plain blue dress. Men in the tent rose politely upon her entrance. She took a seat beside her mother, glancing at maps and listening to the talk of supply routes, alliances, and the Lannister movements. When they discussed Marjorie's envoy and the possibility of negotiations, Sansa spoke up quietly. Marjorie was kind to me in small ways when I was in King's Landing. But the Tyrells are not entirely altruistic. They want power and security for themselves. And they have a way of smiling while they set a trap. The Great John raised an eyebrow at her directness. Lady Sansa, you know them well? She nodded, cheeks coloring slightly. I spent time with Marjorie at her invitation. She was always sympathetic, but also always looking for an advantage. I believe she wants peace, but only if it makes her and her family stronger. That might mean an alliance with us, or it might mean discarding us if Tywin offers a sweeter deal. Robb exchanged a thoughtful look with Catelyn. So we remain cautious. Sansa lowered her eyes. Yes, but we can talk to her. She might keep Tommen gentle, at least. He's a sweet boy. Catelyn reached for Sansa's hand under the table, squeezing it in silent support. The council soon shifted to other matters, troop distributions, possible forays against raiding Lannister companies. Sansa listened in quiet fascination, occasionally wincing at the more brutal details. After, when the meeting ended, she stood up and whispered to Catelyn, "It all feels so strange. I used to think war was heroic stories, not this." Catelyn nodded sadly. "I once believed similarly. But reality is far harsher, my dear." Sansa's gaze flicked to the map. "I miss Winterfell. I miss simpler days." Catelyn pulled her into a gentle hug. "So do I. But we must do what we can, here and now." Morning dawned with a thick mist that clung to the fields, muffling sound. Catelyn woke early, stepping outside to find the world draped in pale gray. Torches glowed like fuzzy orbs and tents loomed as shadowy shapes. She made her way to the command area, heart heavy with the knowledge that this war was far from done. She found Robb conferring with Edmure Tully and the Grey John. They had just received word from scouts. Lannister outriders were probing further north, possibly testing the defenses. Tywin's army might be on the move. Catelyn stood by, listening. If the Lannisters advanced, it would be a brutal campaign in the Riverlands once more. Civilians would suffer. Villages would burn. Robb pressed a knuckle to his mouth, eyes dark with concern. If Tywin means to force a major battle, we'll have to choose the ground carefully. But if Marjorie's negotiations hold any promise, could he be baiting us into a show of weakness? The Great John spat. "Let the negotiations talk on. We'll keep our steel ready." Rob nodded, then turned to Catelyn. Mother, you said you once spoke to your sister Lisa in the Vale about possible aid. Have we heard from her? Catelyn sighed. No, not since her last letter, which was all about preserving the Vale's neutrality. I doubt we can rely on her forces. Rob's jaw tightened. Then we stand alone, aside from what alliances we've forged here. They would have to rely on themselves and possibly the Tyrell machinations in King's Landing. A precarious position indeed. When the tent flap opened and Sansa slipped inside hesitantly, Rob glanced at her, his expression softening. Sansa, you needn't be here so early. But I'm glad you came. She dipped her head. I want to help however I can. Even if it's just by. I don't know, recalling details from King's Landing. Or the Tyrell's preferences. Rob managed a small smile. Every bit of information helps. The great John greeted her kindly, though Edmure wore a politely concerned expression. They all recognized that Sansa's presence at war councils was unorthodox, but the war had twisted norms in every possible way. She stood quietly, hands folded, as they discussed the possible routes Tywin's vanguard might take. Her face tightened with each mention of Lannister forces. Catelyn sensed that her daughter might be imagining those men returning her to captivity. Yet she braced herself, listening intently. Once the men dispersed to tend to tasks, Rob turned to Sansa. Sister, I know this is overwhelming, but I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you think. She flushed slightly. Thank you, Rob. After a moment, she added, I wish to speak to Lady Margaery's messenger. Perhaps I can glean something from her about the mood in the capital. Rob looked uncertain. Are you sure? That might stir unpleasant memories. Sansa steadied herself. Yes, but I need to face it. Catelyn admired her daughter's resolve. The timid girl who once believed wholeheartedly in courtly songs was gone, replaced by someone tempered in adversity who still felt fear but did not let it paralyze her. She laid a hand gently on Sansa's shoulder. I'll come with you. So it was that they found Colleen in the guest tent, sipping watered wine. She rose at once, bowing to them. Sansa, though clearly nervous, asked about Margaery's standing in court, about how Tommen fared, about the rumors swirling around Joffrey's death. The maid answered in vague courtesies, but Catelyn could see how Sansa's calm, direct questions put the woman on the defensive. Eventually, Colleen slipped, letting slip that Margaery had to contend with Cersei Lannister, who raged at the Tyrells day and night, blaming them for Joffrey's demise. Tywin was forced to keep a lid on the feud, but he could not quell Cersei's bitterness entirely. Sansa took in every word, occasionally glancing at Catelyn with a knowing look. After the conversation ended and Colleen excused herself, Sansa confided, Margaery is stronger than I realized. She's wrestling with Cersei and Tywin alike and maintaining her position. Perhaps she really can influence a peace if it suits her. But that also means she might drop us if we become a liability. Catelyn nodded gravely. We'll remain wary. Days stretched into weeks. Misty mornings gave way to bright, chilly afternoons. The leaves turned deeper shades of orange, red, and gold. Scouts reported occasional clashes along the roads, but no massive Lannister host had appeared yet. It felt like a tense lull, a moment of quiet before the real storm. Sansa spent her time learning from the healers, occasionally tending to wounded men. She still woke at night with nightmares, but her eyes shone with more determination each day. Meanwhile, Rob corresponded with Margaery through her messenger, exploring the possibility of formal talks. Tywin's name hovered over every exchange like a threat. The Old Lion wanted the North Bend. The North wanted freedom. Margaery danced between them, offering sweet words about compromise and a new era of cooperation. Whether it was real or feigned, no one could say. At last, a letter arrived with an offer. Margaery suggested an official meeting on neutral ground outside the walls of Harrenhal. She would come with a small retinue and Rob might do the same. They would discuss potential terms to end the war or at least establish a truce. Tywin approved the notion, though Catelyn suspected he did so only to appear magnanimous or perhaps to lull them into a vulnerable position. But ignoring the invitation might mean missing a chance at peace. Rob and his council debated fiercely. Half the lords insisted it was a trap. The other half argued they had to at least hear the terms. In the end, Rob decided to attend, provided they took precautions, a strong guard, a carefully chosen site, watchers in the surrounding area. Catelyn agreed it was worth the risk. Too much blood had been spilled. On the appointed day, they rode out toward Harrenhal, a place steeped in ghosts and dark legend. The castle's melted towers loomed against the horizon, a permanent scar on the land. Roose Bolton, the castellan, had agreed to vacate the vicinity of the main gate for the talks. A broad field near the outer wall was chosen, ringed by watchful archers. Catelyn rode beside Rob at the head of a column of knights. Sansa remained at the main camp for her safety, though she had wanted to come. The air felt thick with tension as they approached the imposing ruin. Harrenhal's blackened stone and towering walls seemed to leer down at them, a grim reminder of the Targaryen conquest long ago. They arrived to find Margaery Tyrell already waiting, her banners lightly fluttering. She wore a rich green and gold gown, her hair twisted into an elaborate style. A small contingent of Tyrell guards stood at her back, maybe a dozen men, plus ladies in waiting. No sign of Lannister soldiers. Catelyn suspected they hid nearby, or else Margaery had truly come alone. Robb dismounted, handing the reins to a squire. Catelyn followed, scanning the field. She spotted Roose Bolton's men along the walls, crossbows at the ready, likely under orders to keep the peace. The battered gates of Harrenhal loomed behind them, yawning open in silent menace. Margaery stepped forward, her smile poised and warm. "Your Grace," she said, inclining her head to Robb. Then her gaze flicked to Catelyn. "Lady Catelyn, I am pleased we can meet under more pleasant circumstances than our last brush, where everything had to be done in secret." Robb's jaw was tense, but he bowed politely. "We all prefer open negotiation to underhanded schemes." Margaery's lips twitched. "Indeed. Shall we speak of peace, then? Or at least an armistice that spares us further bloodshed?" Her ladies stood behind her, expressions carefully composed. Robb motioned for his bannermen to remain at a short distance, though the Great John hovered protectively. Catelyn and Margaery led the way to a small pavilion set up for the talks. Inside, a table waited, along with benches. The Tyrell guards and Stark guards positioned themselves outside, watchful. One or two scribes hovered within, ready to record any agreements. Margaery gestured gracefully for them to sit. Once settled, she spoke in a low, serious tone. "I will be plain. Tommen is king by law now, with my betrothal still in place. Lord Tywin remains hand, but I believe an end to this war benefits everyone. The realm is weary. If certain concessions can be made, we might persuade Tywin that continuing the conflict is too costly." Robb leaned forward, arms braced on the table. "And those concessions are?" Margaery studied him. "First, the North's formal recognition that Tommen is king of the southern lands from the Trident down. In exchange, the crown would acknowledge your dominion over the North. A partition, if you will, two realms coexisting in peace. That means no further attempts to place a Stark on the Iron Throne, and in return, no attempts by the crown to reclaim the North. You would be an independent kingdom as your forebears were." Catelyn felt a rush of hope. This was precisely what Robb had declared, the North free from southern rule. But it sounded too good to be true. Tywin Lannister granting them independence? She narrowed her eyes. "And the price?" Margaery's tone did not waver. "An exchange of hostages to ensure good faith. Perhaps Lord Rickon or Lord Bran, once they're recovered, if indeed they still hold Winterfell. Some surety that the North won't suddenly ride south on a whim. And Tywin will demand certain trade privileges, grain from the Reach passes through the Trident after all. He wants to ensure no blockade. Also, the crown may ask for the neutralization of certain northern lords who have committed acts against Lannister bannermen." She paused meaningfully, glancing at Robb. "It might be a matter of removing them from power, or handing them over." Robb's eyes flashed. "You want me to deliver my own men to Tywin for execution?" Margaery shook her head quickly. "I do not want that, Your Grace. Tywin might. He specifically loathes certain lords who have been creative in harassing Lannister lands. Perhaps there's a middle ground, banishment, or something less final." The Great John, who stood behind Robb, bristled. "This is an outrage. We won't sell out loyal men." Robb raised a hand, stilling him. "I understand your position, Lady Margaery. But Tywin's demands are steep if he expects us to surrender men who have fought bravely. He demands hostages, trade concessions, the culling of my own supporters. In exchange, we get a piece of paper saying the North is free. How do we know he won't renege once we lay down arms?" Margaery's eyes flickered with sympathy. "You have my word that I will use every resource to ensure the treaty is honored. House Tyrell wields great power in the Crown's councils, and Tommen is fond of me. If Tywin breaks the treaty, he risks alienating the entire Reach. He does not want that." Catelyn recognized the subtle truth. If Tywin dared betray the agreement, the Tyrells could break from him, starving King's Landing of supplies. Even the Lannisters might not withstand that. Margaery's plan had logic. Yet the cost, handing over certain northern lords, sending hostages, trusting the crown's forbearance, felt bitter. Robb sat back, silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke in a low tone. I need time to consider. And I need Sansa's input. She suffered greatly at Joffrey's hands. I will not risk her again, or any of my siblings, by sending them into Tywin's grasp as hostages. Marjorie nodded. I understand. No hostages need come from those already harmed. Another member of your house, perhaps? Or a cousin. I propose it only because Tywin will insist. The Lannisters demand a show of good faith. Otherwise, he fears you'll wait to rebuild, then strike again. Catelyn looked at Robb, whose eyes flicked to her. She knew he was thinking of potential alternatives. The Karstarks, the Umbers, the Boltons. Someone might be forced to sacrifice a family member as a hostage to maintain a fragile peace. The notion sickened her, but the entire war was sickening. If it spared thousands of lives, how could they refuse? The meetings stretched on, the details twisting into complexities of trade rights, maritime boundaries, alliances. Marjorie listened to their concerns with a poised grace, occasionally promising to speak to Tywin about modifications. In the end, they agreed to draft a preliminary outline, with the final terms subject to a formal gathering in King's Landing or some neutral city if safer. Until then, hostilities would remain on hold, unless the North attacked first. Tywin, she promised, would likewise rein in his forces, though Catelyn doubted his sincerity. As they parted ways outside the pavilion, Marjorie reached out to Catelyn. Lady Catelyn, I'm truly glad Sansa is free. Tell her I wish her healing and happiness. Perhaps, one day, she might visit me in a safer King's Landing. Catelyn managed a thin smile. I'll tell her. Thank you. Marjorie's expression softened. No one deserves what Joffrey did to her. I only wish I could have done more, but perhaps we can shape the future. Good luck, my lady. Then she mounted her palfrey and rode off with her retinue, vanishing around the crumbled walls of Harrenhal. Robb and his men remained, overseeing final tasks with Bolton's soldiers. Catelyn felt drained, uncertain if they had inched closer to genuine peace or simply stepped into another Lannister snare. That night, they made camp near the blackened towers. The wind howled through the ruins like restless spirits. Catelyn huddled in her tent with Robb, reading over the draft of the agreement. A chill settled in her bones as she imagined handing over a northern hostage to Tywin Lannister's control, or exiling loyal lords to satisfy the crown's thirst for retribution. Yet the alternative was continued war, endless bloodshed, and further torment for the small folk. She thought of Sansa's bruises, her trembling nightmares. What do we choose? Catelyn asked softly, gazing at Robb over the flickering lantern light. His young face looked grim, far older than his years. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to spit in Tywin's face, keep fighting until we drive him from our lands forever. But can we truly defeat him if the Tyrells remain allied to the crown? Catelyn's voice shook. And if we lose, Sansa becomes a target again. Or Arya, wherever she is, might suffer. I hate bending the knee to the man who killed your father. But maybe partial freedom for the North is better than a ruinous war. Robb raked a hand through his hair, exhaling. I'll consult with the lords. We'll decide together. He glanced at her. What do you think father would do? She swallowed, tears pricking her eyes. He would strive to protect his family and his people above all. If that meant accepting bitter terms to save lives, he might do it. He was a man of honor, but he also cared deeply for the innocent caught in war's path. Robb nodded slowly. Then I'll hold that in my heart. But I won't be blind to the possibility Tywin might renege. She leaned across the small table and grasped his hand. We'll stand together, Robb. We'll find a path that protects our family. He squeezed her hand. In the haunted silence of Harrenhal, mother and son shared a moment of fragile unity. The ghostly wind whistled through scorched towers, as though the spirits of ancient kings bore witness to their choices. Whether they would find lasting peace or simply a new battlefield remained an open question. When they returned to the main encampment, the lords reacted with a mix of shock and anger to the proposed terms. The Great John refused to consider giving up any men to Lannister justice, railing that it would shame the North. Ricard Karstark demanded vengeance for the blood spilled by Tywin's men. Others, weary of the war, saw it as a chance to preserve their lands. Sansa listened quietly to these debates from the sidelines, a troubled expression on her face. At one point, she asked Catelyn, "Does this mean Tywin Lannister might let us live in peace?" Catelyn sighed. "Perhaps, but I do not trust him. This is more about the Tyrells' balancing act. If Tywin sees a benefit in peace, he'll accept it until it no longer suits him." Sansa lowered her eyes. "I wish we could just go home. All of us." "So do I," Catelyn whispered. Soon, letters passed between Robb and Margaery, refining details. The notion of sending a minor Northern Lord's heir as a hostage arose, an alternative to surrendering a Stark child. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister demanded that Roose Bolton come to King's Landing for a hearing on alleged atrocities. Bolton smirked at the idea and told Robb he had no intention of stepping into a lion's den unless forced. The negotiations veered toward stalemate. Into this tense scene rode another messenger one afternoon, bearing urgent news from Riverrun. Lord Hoster Tully's health had taken a dire turn. Edmure Tully asked for Catelyn to return at once to see her father before he passed. She felt a fresh wave of grief, though she had known this day was coming. Robb insisted she go. "Take Sansa with you if you wish. Riverrun is safer behind its walls than here on the front lines." Catelyn considered, then nodded. "I will." She could use the comfort of her Tully kin. And it might be wise to keep her out of Tywin's reach if the fighting resumes. Sansa did not protest, though fear flickered in her eyes at the thought of more travel. She was growing braver, but she remained haunted. If Riverrun's walls offered her a respite, so be it. Catelyn knew leaving Robb here to manage the precarious negotiations weighed on her, but she also understood the necessity. With Sansa safe, Robb could maneuver more boldly. If the Lannisters attacked in her absence, all she could do was pray the gods would shield him. They departed at dawn, a modest escort of Tully men and Brienne riding alongside them. Sansa seemed subdued, wrapped in a thick cloak against the chill. As they left the encampment, she cast a final glance toward Robb's tall figure. He lifted a hand in farewell, gray wind at his side. Then the group pushed forward into the rolling hills that led toward Riverrun. The journey took several days, the roads less perilous now that the main warfront had shifted. Still, they encountered burned farms, deserted hamlets, signs of past skirmishes. Sansa looked upon the devastation with sorrow and anger, quietly asking Catelyn if these were Lannister raids or Stark reprisals. Often, Catelyn could only answer that war spared no one. When at last Riverrun's familiar red walls rose before them, a wave of homesick relief washed over Catelyn. She had not been here in too long. The drawbridge lowered, and they rode across, greeted by Edmure Tully's anxious face. He embraced his sister quickly, then bowed to Sansa, who offered a polite curtsy in return. Brienne gazed around, ever watchful. "How is father?" Catelyn asked urgently. Edmure's face was grim. "He is weak, delirious at times. The maester says he has days, maybe a week. Hurry, cat." She wasted no time, guiding Sansa to the keep's interior. There, they were taken to Hoster Tully's chambers, where the old lord lay beneath heavy blankets, hair thin and white, breath rasping. He roused at the sound of Catelyn's voice, blinking watery eyes. "Cat, you've come," he whispered. "Good, so good." She knelt by his bedside, tears already gathering. "Father, I've missed you." He coughed, a painful sound that rattled in his chest. "War. So much war. I fear for our lands, the Tully name." His gaze flickered to Sansa, who stood behind Catelyn. That's Ned's girl?" Catelyn nodded, beckoning Sansa forward. The girl bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, grandfather." Hoster Tully smiled, a frail curve of his lips. "Beautiful, like your mother. Keep the family strong." He closed his eyes, drifting into a fevered murmur of old memories and regrets. Catelyn smoothed a damp cloth over his brow, tears slipping down her cheeks. As the day wore on, The maester tended him, but it was clear no cure could be found for the ravages of age and illness. Catelyn and Sansa remained in the room, offering what comfort they could. Edmure joined them when he could, though his duties as the acting Lord of Riverrun kept him busy. They told Hoster of recent events in gentler terms, withholding the most brutal details. He was lucid enough to ask if the North still stood if their cause survived. Catelyn assured him it did. That evening, Sansa found Catelyn in a quiet alcove where she was trying to compose herself. The girl hesitated, then spoke softly. "I'm so sorry about your father, Mother. This war, it's taken so much." Catelyn drew her into a hug. "Thank you, sweetling. It's part of life, but it still hurts." Sansa nodded, tears in her own eyes. "I wish we could end the war so no more families lose their fathers." Catelyn's heart clenched. Perhaps that was what these negotiations with Margaery and Tywin were all about, the hope that no more children would watch a parent die before their time or lose them in a swirl of violence. Yet the cost of peace was painfully high. She only hoped they could find a path that did not betray all they had fought for. Days in Riverrun passed with the hush of morning. Lord Hoster Tully slipped in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he called Catelyn by her mother's name, other times he whispered about Lisa, about the old days before Robert's rebellion. Finally, one cool afternoon, the maester signaled that the end was near. Catelyn took Sansa's hand, and together with Edmure, they gathered at Hoster's bedside. He opened his eyes one last time, gazing at his children and granddaughter. A faint spark of recognition flitted across his features. Catelyn squeezed his hand, tears dripping onto the linen. He managed a final breath, parted his lips as if to speak, then fell still. A profound silence filled the room. Catelyn bowed her head over her father's lifeless form. Edmure, voice choked, murmured a prayer to the Seven. Sansa placed a trembling hand on Catelyn's shoulder. The passing of Lord Hoster Tully felt like the end of an era, another link to the peaceful days of old severed by time. That night, by tradition, they set Lord Hoster's body on a funeral boat in the Tumblestone's calm current. Edmure, tears still in his eyes, fired the flaming arrow that arced through the evening sky. It struck the boat's small sail, igniting a blaze that reflected on the water. Catelyn stood with Sansa on the riverbank, watching the flames drift away. She thought of Ned's bones, somewhere lost in the shifting fortunes of war, and of how the realm itself seemed to be burning on a funeral pyre. After the funeral, Edmure was formally installed as Lord of Riverrun. His manner grew more subdued, aware of his responsibilities in a war-torn Riverlands. Catelyn lingered, helping him manage affairs. Sansa tried to assist, but the heartbreak in the castle was palpable. Memories of Hoster Tully lingered in every hall. They received word from Robb that the negotiations had stalled again. Tywin demanded more than Robb would give. Yet the fighting had not resumed in earnest, as if both sides weighed the next move. Margaery wrote that she continued to press for a resolution. Letters arrived from various lords, some desperate for peace, others spoiling for more war. One afternoon, Sansa found Catelyn in the solar, scanning the latest messages. A stack of reports lay on the table: burned villages, crops ruined, families displaced. Even with no large battles raging, the land bled from the countless lesser wounds inflicted by raiders and outlaws. Sansa drew near, quietly reading over her mother's shoulder. "There's so much suffering," she murmured. "If peace could end it, is it worth the price we must pay?" Catelyn brushed a hand over her daughter's hair, sorrow tugging at her chest. "I want to believe so. But we must be sure the peace is genuine. Otherwise, we lay down our arms only to be struck in the back." Sansa nodded, eyes lingering on the grim accounts of famine and lawlessness. "I understand." That evening, Edmure convened a small gathering of Tully bannermen to discuss their stance. Many were reluctant to bend to any Lannister demands, but the memory of the Tully lord's funeral was fresh. They agreed they would follow Robb's lead. If he found terms for an honorable settlement, they would accept. If war continued, they would fight. Catelyn sensed that Sansa had grown more aware of the harsh choices faced by rulers. No longer a naive girl, she wrestled with the moral quandaries of conceding something to the Lannisters to end the bloodshed. Whenever they spoke privately, Sansa questioned whether it was better to accept an imperfect peace that spares children like her from torment. A week after Hoster Tully's funeral, a raven arrived from Robb. The letter bore a coded phrase they had agreed upon in advance, indicating that matters in the negotiations had reached a breaking point. Catelyn read his words, heart-pounding. "Mother, Tywin demands we deliver certain northern lords for punishment. He names Karstark, Bolton, and others as war criminals. I cannot and will not hand them over, nor would they submit. Margaery tries to mediate, but Cersei's rage demands blood. Tywin threatens to renew the war if we do not comply. I face a choice: yield to them or resume the fight." The great John roars for battle and many men thirst for it. Yet so many more have died. I need your counsel. If we refuse, Tywin marches. If we agree, our allies will turn on us, and I cannot guarantee we won't be betrayed after we disarm. Is there a path that preserves the north and spares further bloodshed? I will await your word, though time is short. Pray for guidance, mother, for I am at a crossroads. Robb. Catelyn lowered the letter, her pulse thudding. She thought of the Karstarks, whose Lord Rickard had lost sons in this war, and of Roose Bolton, cunning and cold. Tywin wanted them delivered as scapegoats for the realm's suffering. That demand was impossible. The North would never accept it, yet refusing might unleash Tywin's full fury. She summoned Sansa, showed her the letter, and explained the predicament. The girl's face went pale. They want those lords' heads as retribution for the war? But it was Tywin who started it all by attacking us. Yes, Catelyn said bitterly, but the victors often rewrite history to their liking. Tywin Lannister is determined to show no mercy. Sansa's eyes grew distant, then she said in a quiet, determined voice, Mother, I need to go speak with Lord Edmure. We must decide what advice to give Robb. Catelyn studied her daughter, seeing not the timid child from King's Landing but a young woman shaped by pain. She nodded. Let's go. We have little time. They found Edmure Tully in the Great Hall, conferring with a few lords. Catelyn showed him Robb's letter summarizing the demands. The men bristled, outraged at Tywin's gall. Sansa listened as they debated. Finally, she asked softly, Does Lord Tywin truly think we would serve him the heads of our own allies? One of the lords snorted. He thinks to break the North's unity, turn us on each other. If we do it, we lose face and our allies. If we refuse, war resumes. Edmure raked a hand through his hair, exasperated. Robb wants guidance, but we're no closer to answers. Sansa drew a breath. Could we perhaps arrange a false punishment? Exile or feigned imprisonment, but actually keep them safe? Or let them flee into the mountains? The men exchanged glances. Catelyn considered it. A ruse might work if Tywin can be convinced we truly cast them out. But Lord Karstark would never go quietly. Nor would Bolton. They might see it as betrayal. Edmure frowned. And Tywin might demand proof, like heads on spikes. Or he might see through the deception. Sansa folded her arms. Then is there no alternative but to fight? A bleak silence followed. At length, Catelyn spoke, her voice low and grim. We must hold firm. We cannot deliver our own allies to be butchered. It would shatter any claim Robb has to kingship. The North would despise him. Tywin knows this. His demand is no real offer of peace. It's a cunning attempt to break us from within. Edmure nodded slowly. So we send word that we reject that term. We're back to war. They all felt the weight of that conclusion. Sansa looked stricken. Then more will die. Is there truly no other way? Catelyn touched her daughter's hand gently. No other that Tywin will accept. I'm sorry, Sansa. We tried. Late that night, Catelyn drafted her reply to Robb, urging him to stand firm against Tywin's demands, to propose alternate solutions if possible. But it seemed unlikely the Lannisters would bend. She wrote that the Tully forces remained at his disposal. She included a private note of love and encouragement, telling him that Sansa was safe at Riverrun, that they prayed for a swift resolution. When she finished, her hand shook, tears threatening. Sansa, who had lingered quietly, embraced her mother from behind. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know how hard you worked for peace. Maybe one day it will come. Catelyn let out a shaky breath. One day. The next morning, the raven flew out from Riverrun, carrying the letter that might seal the realm's fate. Sansa watched it disappear into the sky, her expression solemn. Whatever happened next would shape the destiny of the North and the entire realm. Tywin and Robb would either find a final battlefield or somehow, by a slender miracle, stumble onto a last-minute compromise. Yet for Catelyn, one thing remained certain. By killing Jaime Lannister, she had cut off any chance of easy bargaining. She had freed herself from the false hope that Jaime's life could be traded for Sansa's well-being. But the realm had paid in blood. Now Sansa was free, her bruises healing slowly. Perhaps it was worth all the anguish, or perhaps it was a trade the gods themselves would question. In a realm built on shifting alliances and bitter vendettas, no one could say for sure. At least, in that moment, mother and daughter were together under the red walls of Riverrun, a small beacon of love in a land overshadowed by war. Catelyn vowed she would protect Sansa no matter the cost. If Tywin's hosts came again, the Tully banners would fly beside the Stark direwolf, and they would resist until the last. Honor or vengeance, she no longer knew which drove her. She only knew that family remained her pillar in a collapsing world. She walked the battlements that evening, Sansa by her side, gazing at the tumblestone's flowing waters. The westering sun cast ripples of gold over the surface, and a breeze stirred the banners overhead. In the distance, the land stretched toward the horizon, scarred by battles but still enduring. Catelyn closed her eyes, imagining a future free of war, where Sansa could sing without trembling, where Arya might come home, where Robb, Bran, and Rickon lived in peace. That future lay beyond the battle that loomed, uncertain as the wind. Yet she clutched hope tightly as she had once clutched that dagger in Jaime Lannister's cell. This time, she prayed the outcome would deliver not just vengeance, but some measure of healing. If the gods were listening, perhaps they would grant the Starks a chance to rebuild and let the realm find its way back from the brink of ruin. For now, she stood with Sansa, the hush of the river below, both braced for the next turn of fate in the war that had begun with one terrible push from a tower and one bitter stroke of a blade. If there was to be light at the end, they would not see it yet, but they would not stop searching. Catelyn remained on the battlements long after the sun vanished behind the horizon. She could see torches guttering in the courtyard below, men moving in slow silhouettes across the walkways. The waters of the tumblestone flowed on, whispering the same quiet lullaby they had offered her as a child. It was a murmur of continuity that felt painfully at odds with the turmoil gripping Westeros. Riverrun stood as a final sanctuary for her in many ways, one of the last places where she had ever felt the warmth of family without the threat of war casting its shadow. Now even this refuge was dimmed by sorrow for her father's passing, by the memory of Ned's execution, and by the endless weight of decisions that lay ahead. She looked to her left, where Sansa leaned against the stone parapet, gazing out over the darkened fields. The girl's hair was loose tonight, when teasing it around her pale cheeks. Sansa had come so far from the timid young lady who had once dreamed only of courtly life and shining knights. Loss and hardship had hollowed out something in her, then filled that space with a resilient determination that reflected in her eyes. Catelyn wanted to protect her from the next storm, but she knew the war would claim them all if it raged too fiercely, no matter how strong their battlements or how carefully laid their plans. They lingered in silence for a time, each lost in her own swirl of thoughts. Eventually, Sansa asked in a soft voice if they would see Robb soon, if there was any chance he might ride here rather than remain in the field. Catelyn exhaled, pushing hair away from her face. She answered that, for the moment, Robb had to hold the lines in the Riverlands and keep watch for a southern advance. More than ever, Tywin Lannister's demands made it clear that a greater conflict lay just over the horizon. Riverrun would be safer than Robb's war camps, so mother and daughter would stay behind these walls for a while longer. When the wind picked up and the night air turned sharper, they descended the steps to the keep. A hush lay over the corridors, as though the castle itself still mourned Hoster Tully. Edmure was in conference with his steward, dealing with petitions from small folk who had fled the war-torn villages. His new duties weighed heavily on him, but to his credit, he had thrown himself into the role of Lord of Riverrun with a diligence Catelyn had not always expected from her brother. He was still prone to rash decisions, but grief for their father and the dire circumstances seemed to have tempered his impulsive streak. Catelyn and Sansa parted ways near the keep's main hall. Sansa, weary from an emotional day, went to her chambers under the watchful escort of Brienne. Catelyn lingered to speak with Maester Vyman, who waited with fresh reports from the scouts near Harrenhal. She dreaded the possibility of reading more about Tywin's movements, but she had no choice. That was her duty now. If any sign pointed to an imminent invasion, they had to prepare. The memory of how quickly the Lannisters had struck in the early days of the war still haunted her. She joined Vyman in the small solar where a single candle flickered on a wooden table. He handed her 2 letters. One bore Roose Bolton's seal, the other came from Robb himself. At once, her pulse quickened. Bolton's letter would be filled with his usual precision and cold observations, but Robb's was what she yearned to read first. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. Mother, I received your reply. As I suspected, Tywin did not react well to our refusal. He is already issuing edicts accusing the Northmen of obstinacy and treason against the crown. Stannis Baratheon has re-emerged in the Stormlands, forcing Tywin to commit some forces there, but the old lion is canny. He has not fully marched north. Instead, he waits, hoping we will exhaust ourselves or make a misstep. I fear if I do nothing, we risk losing morale, but if I strike west at the Lannisters, we risk being caught between Tywin and the forces still loyal to Joffrey's memory. Marjorie Tyrell's efforts to broker peace are stalled. She claims to negotiate in good faith, but I sense an undercurrent of self-preservation. If war flares again in earnest, we will need Riverrun's support. I may ask Edmure to bring additional men and provisions or to coordinate with me so that we can stand strong along the Red Fork. All of this is to say, remain vigilant. Keep Sansa safe at all costs. Let the Tully banners stand if I must call upon them. Enclosed are a few personal words for Sansa which you can share at your discretion. I miss you both. I pray we will find a path that secures the North and spares further bloodshed. But if not, I will do what I must as king in the North. Robb. Catelyn held the parchment to her chest for a moment, eyes stinging. She took a measured breath, then opened Bolton's letter. As expected, it was a dispassionate account of troop movements, supply lines, and rumors of Tywin's dealings with certain mercenary companies. Bolton wrote that he had engaged in cautious dialogues with figures in King's Landing who might sow further discord among the Lannisters and Tyrells. Yet the letter offered few details, clearly for fear of interception. The last line read, "A final note of caution. The men speak of unrest among Lord Karstark's ranks, still bitter over his lost sons. I would tread carefully, lest his anger lead to unwise actions." Setting aside the letters, Catelyn rubbed her temple. Karstark's thirst for vengeance was well known. He blamed the Lannisters for the deaths of his heirs. If Tywin refused to yield, Karstark might attempt something rash, fracturing the North's unity. They couldn't afford that, but neither could they ignore his grief. This entire war began with the fracturing of alliances. One more crack could bring the whole foundation down. She thanked Maester Vyman and trudged through the lamplit corridors to Edmure's study. Inside, she found him hunched over a table strewn with ledgers, a half-drained cup of wine by his side. He looked up, nodded wearily. "More news?" he asked. She handed him Robb's letter. He read it, expression grim. "So Tywin is content to let us stew. We can't just wait for him to choose the time and place of battle." "Robb's in a precarious position," Catelyn said. "He has to maintain his men's confidence. If they see him hesitating, they may lose faith, or if he charges blindly, we might be trapped. He needs our support more than ever." Edmure placed the letter down. "We'll send word that Riverrun stands ready. Our men have been training, but the Riverlands are so scarred. I don't know how we'll feed more soldiers through another winter of war." Catelyn sat across from him. She could smell the stale bitterness of wine and see the weight of lordship etched into his features. "We have to find ways to gather supplies. The Freys owe us for letting them profit from the crossing. Walder Frey might posture, but if we press him, he should contribute more grain. We can't allow the region to starve if Tywin does strike." Edmure nodded, scribbling a note. "I'll dispatch riders to the Twins, demand a proper levy. But with the Freys, it's always a negotiation. They keep track of every crumb. I'll do what I can." They spoke for a while longer, working through the practicalities of forging a defensive front. By the time Catelyn rose to leave, exhaustion tugged at her bones. She longed for simpler days when her biggest concern was whether the harvest feast at Winterfell would impress the visiting lords. Now everything was life and death, families uprooted, a realm verging on collapse. She remembered how swiftly and violently the realm had turned on Ned when he tried to expose the truth about Joffrey's parentage. That single betrayal had cascaded into so much suffering. Sleep offered little respite. She dreamed of a shadowy corridor in the Red Keep, where voices echoed off stone walls, whispering about her father's death and Ned's final moments. In the dream, she ran from door to door, searching for Sansa, for Robb, hearing the clank of a headsman's sword. She woke with a start, heart pounding. Outside, dawn was graying the sky. Another day, another series of challenges. She washed her face and went to Sansa's room, finding the girl already dressed, gazing out the window. Sansa turned at her mother's approach. Catelyn handed her the enclosed note from Robb. She watched as Sansa's eyes scanned the page, tears welling. He wrote about how proud he was that she'd come through the trial with such courage, how he hoped to see her soon, how her presence gave him strength even from afar. Sansa pressed the parchment to her lips, cheeks damp. "I wish I could write him back," she whispered. Just to tell him I'm all right, to keep his spirits up as well. Catelyn nodded, managing a small smile. We can dispatch a raven. I'm sure he'd be glad to hear your voice in whatever form it takes. Sansa brightened slightly, then frowned. Though I have little good news to share. It's all so grim. Even so, Catelyn said gently, he'll find comfort in your words. And you can share your hope for the future if you have any left. Sansa inhaled as though summoning that very hope. She nodded. I do. They spent part of the morning drafting a careful letter. Sansa tried to keep it light in tone, but her love and concern for her brother shone through. She wrote of wanting him to remain safe, of missing him terribly, and of praying for a peace that would let them all be under the same roof again. When she finished, Catelyn placed the folded parchment in the raven's pouch, sealing it with the Tully stamp, and sent it on its way. In the days that followed, Sansa fell into a new routine at Riverrun. She walked the battlements, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by Brienne, sometimes by Catelyn. She visited the Sept daily, lighting candles for Ned, for her grandfather, even for the lost souls who had perished in the endless battles. Her voice, once so quick to sing ballads of courtly love, now seldom rose in song. Catelyn sensed that grief lingered in her daughter's heart, a longing for the illusions she'd lost. But Sansa's strength, the quiet core of steel that had emerged in King's Landing, did not fade. She asked questions about provisioning the castle, about how to help the families that flocked to the gates for shelter. She assisted with bandages and tried to comfort the wounded. Over time, the people of Riverrun saw in her the compassion of a true lady, and they spoke kindly of the young Stark who had endured so much. Meanwhile, Edmure's men scrambled to fortify the region. Small repairs to the outer walls, stockpiling of grain and salted fish, forging new arrowheads, every day carried the hum of preparation. Catelyn offered suggestions where she could, drawing on her knowledge of how Ned had managed Winterfell's stores. Sansa sometimes watched the hustle with a mix of fascination and dread, aware that these measures were not for a festival but for the possibility of siege or invasion. The war's shadow loomed, even if Tywin was content to wait for now. On a crisp afternoon, as a pale sun filtered through the lingering clouds, a horn's distant call echoed across the fields. Catelyn and Sansa were in the courtyard, observing a practice drill of pikemen. They exchanged startled looks. Horn blasts of that sort typically signaled approaching riders. At once, guards sprang to life, some manning the walls, others rushing to open the gates if it was indeed a friendly party. Catelyn handed Sansa off to Brienne's protective watch, instructing them to remain near the keep, and made her way to the drawbridge. From the battlements, she saw a small group of riders bearing a banner that fluttered in the wind, House Karstark's sigil, the white sunburst over black. Her heart tightened. Karstark had parted ways from Robb's main forces weeks ago, upset over what he deemed insufficient vengeance for his slain sons. This could mean trouble. She ordered the gate lowered. The riders trotted inside, their horses lathered with sweat, and halted in the courtyard. At their head was Lord Rickard Karstark himself, a tall man with a face like chiseled stone, framed by graying hair. He wore a thick fur cloak, though it was dusty and travel-stained from the road. His men looked equally worn. Catelyn approached, adopting as regal a bearing as she could manage. "Lord Karstark," she said, voice neutral. "This is an unexpected visit." He dismounted stiffly, glancing around with an expression that hovered between impatience and scorn. "Lady Catelyn, I come because I've heard the rumors. Tywin demands my head and others, and your son has not yet set Tywin's castle aflame. I want to know why." Catelyn held her composure. "Robb is trying to preserve what remains of the realm, not burn it all to the ground. But rest assured, he has not abandoned you or any loyal northern house." Karstark snorted, stepping closer. "He might as well have. Tywin Lannister slaughters our children, and we do nothing. We let them propose terms that require our humiliation. This is not the vengeance I was promised." She saw the raw pain in his eyes, the fury that had consumed him since his sons had been killed in battle. She tried to speak calmly. "We understand your grief. But as king, Robb must consider the entire North's welfare, not just vengeance. We cannot bring your sons back, my lord, nor can we end the war overnight." He glowered. "And so we wait like cornered animals? I've lost faith in half measures and negotiations. Let me march my forces south, with or without Robb's blessing. We'll draw Tywin out, or we'll make him feel the sting of our swords." Catelyn inwardly cursed. This was precisely the rash move they feared. A splintering of alliances could ruin them. She glanced around at the courtyard, where Riverrun's guards had gathered in wary circles. Sansa stood near the keep's entrance, watching anxiously. She needed to handle this carefully. Karstark was a dangerous man, but also a proud ally if reined in. "Lord Karstark, please," she said softly, leaning in so others could not overhear. You know that a lone thrust south would be disastrous. Tywin would pick you off in open ground. If you have qualms with Robb's tactics, come inside and speak them calmly. We can find a solution that honors your loss. But you must not go rogue. He stared at her a long moment, his jaw clenched tight. Then he gave a curt nod. Very well. But I will speak plainly with no courtesy. Agreed, she said, forcing a small, polite nod. She ordered stable hands to tend Karstark's horses, then led him and a few of his men into the great hall. Edmure arrived promptly, alerted by the commotion, and joined them at the high table. Sansa slipped inside at the periphery, seating herself quietly near the dais. Brienne stood behind her, watchful as ever. Servants brought bread and wine, but Karstark ignored the food. He folded his arms, glancing around as though reluctant to trust this Tully stronghold. I've grown weary of waiting for Robb's glorious leadership. The Lannisters killed my sons. I want them to pay. If your boy cannot deliver that, then perhaps we should talk about other solutions. Allies outside the north. Or we fight alone. Edmure bristled. Mind your words, my lord. Robb Stark is king in the north and rightful liege to all northern lords. You swore fealty to him. Karstark's glare flicked to Edmure. And I keep that oath so long as he pursues the rightful cause. But if he yields to Tywin's demands or sits idle, what king do I serve? A boy playing at leadership. Catelyn placed a restraining hand on Edmure's arm before he could retort. She addressed Karstark, voice carefully measured. We have not yielded. Tywin's demands are impossible and Robb has refused them. But it remains a strategic matter. If we charge blindly, we lose more of our men. The war is not about a single victory or a single personal vengeance. It's about the North's freedom fro. A tyrant's yoke. Karstark's lips curled as though her words scarcely satisfied him. Freedom? While Tywin sits content, waiting for you to starve or make a mistake. Where's the boldness we showed at Whispering Wood at the Battle of the Camps? We had the Kingslayer once, and he broke off, his tone sharpening. You killed him, yes, so you say. But that gave us no advantage in the end. You squandered the best hostage we had. A hush fell. Catelyn felt the sting of that accusation. Many in the north had whispered the same. She squared her shoulders, refusing to let him see her falter. I did what I believed necessary at the time. Jaime Lannister would never have bought us peace or your sons' lives back. You do not know that, Karstark said coldly. But I will not relitigate the past. I will speak plainly. I intend to gather my men and any others who believe as I do, and we will make Tywin bleed if your son will not. I've come here to see if you, Lady Catelyn, or you, Lord Edmure, will join us. Edmure looked aghast. You threaten to split our forces? To break away from the king in the north? That is treason, Lord Karstark. Karstark met Edmure's stare unflinchingly. Treason? Or a righteous pursuit of vengeance? If Robb will not lead, then I must find a path. The Lannisters will never stop until we force them to. You risk dooming us all, Catelyn said. Her voice caught with anger. Your brash move could hand Tywin exactly what he wants, us divided. Karstark slammed a fist on the table, rattling goblets. Don't lecture me about risk, my lady. My children are already gone. I have only revenge left. In the tense silence, Sansa rose unexpectedly. Everyone's eyes flicked to her, surprised that the girl might speak. She was trembling, but her voice emerged with quiet clarity. Lord Karstark, I know your pain. The Lannisters took my father and tried to take my life as well. But I also know how cunning Tywin can be. Please, do not let his manipulations tear the North apart. If we fight him one by one, we lose everything. Karstark's eyes narrowed as though measuring the girl. You speak with a noble heart, Lady Sansa, but you have not lost children of your own. My wrath is not a trifling matter. Sansa swallowed, but did not back down. You're right, I haven't. I cannot imagine the depth of your grief. But I do know that if you stand alone, Tywin will strike you down. Please remain united with my brother. Let us find a way that honors your loss and keeps us from defeat. Karstark stared at her a long moment. Then he turned away with a rough shake of his head. You speak kindly, but words do not bring me my son's ghosts. Edmure pressed, and a hasty charge into Tywin's jaws won't bring them back either. A bitter chuckle escaped Karstark's lips. No, but it may bring me the satisfaction of watching some Lannisters die. I came here to see if your loyalties could be swayed. I see now you're too deep in the Stark's pocket. So be it. I'll take my chances. Catelyn stood, a flare of desperation in her chest. You'll doom the North, my lord. You'll hand Tywin the advantage. That blood will be on your hands as well. Karstark swept her a look of mingled regret and scorn. My hands are already stained. Your king in the north can come find me if he wishes to lead, but I'll not sit idly while Tywin sits on a throne of my son's bones. He whirled on his heel, calling to his men. We ride at first light. Catelyn opened her mouth to continue the argument, but she saw the fire in Karstark's gaze. Nothing she could say would sway him. He stormed out, his men trailing him. Edmure turned to Catelyn, color drained from his face. Gods, this is a disaster. The hall began to fill with uneasy murmurs, guards shifting uncertainly. Karstark's words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Catelyn realized that if Karstark truly broke away, others might follow, especially those who had suffered personal losses. The fragile coalition that Robb commanded could start to unravel. We must send word to Robb immediately, she said. He must know Karstark's intentions. Edmure nodded. Yes, and quickly. He gestured for a scribe, who rushed forward to prepare a raven. Then he lowered his voice, turning to Sansa. Thank you for speaking, my lady. I'm not sure if anything could have changed his mind, but your words were true. Sansa looked shaken. I hope he doesn't do something that leads to more death. But he seems consumed. Catelyn placed a hand on Sansa's shoulder. He is. Vengeance can be a heavy burden, especially when you've lost loved ones in war. She glanced toward the door through which Karstark had left. Come, let us draft our raven to Robb. He must prepare for Karstark's move. They were located to a smaller side chamber where Edmure dictated the letter and a scribe scratched down every word. The message was dire. Lord Karstark threatened to go rogue, possibly leading a portion of the northern forces on a reckless assault. If Robb could intercept or persuade him otherwise, that might avoid catastrophe. But time was short. Karstark would only remain in Riverrun for the night, perhaps before riding out. Catelyn considered trying to confine him forcibly, but that would spark a new crisis. Imprisoning a major northern lord could be seen as an act of open hostility, igniting a civil rift. They could do little but let him leave and hope Robb had time to respond. Sansa stood by silent, her eyes pensive. Once the raven had been dispatched, she asked quietly if Karstark might even attempt to strike at Sansa herself, out of some misguided blame. Catelyn shook her head, though she was not entirely certain. Karstark's fury was directed at Lannisters, but in war, anger could find any target. She vowed to keep a close eye on him until he departed. The next morning, as dawn's pale light crept into Riverrun's courtyard, Karstark and his men mounted their horses. The guards at the gate parted reluctantly. Catelyn stood on the battlements, cloak pulled tight around her, watching the Karstark banner flutter as it passed under the portcullis. She had the grim certainty that if Karstark truly carried out an independent campaign of vengeance, the realm would see more savage fighting, more atrocities. Tywin might seize upon the disunity and crush them piecemeal. It all felt like a slow unraveling. First the failed negotiations, then Tywin's demands, now Karstark's open defiance. She feared what the next letter from Robb would bring. Days blurred. Scouts reported that Karstark's riders had taken the eastern roads, possibly heading toward Harrenhal or even toward the outskirts of the Crownlands. No one knew exactly. Edmure muttered curses about Karstark's madness, about how it threatened the entire war effort. Meanwhile, refugees continued to arrive at Riverrun's gates, telling stories of bandits, burnt farms, stray bands of sellswords. The region was fracturing under the stress, local lords struggling to keep order. Catelyn felt helpless. She had no army of her own to send out, only the garrison that protected Riverrun. One afternoon, as the chill of autumn deepened, Sansa asked her mother if there was any good news from the north. She wondered about Bran and Rickon, about whether the Ironborn still controlled any lands, about the state of Winterfell. Catelyn had nothing reassuring to offer. Most ravens from the north were weeks old by the time they arrived, and the last she'd heard was that the Bolton men were reclaiming outlying areas. Whether the boys remained safe at Winterfell, she could not say. She tried to hide her own worry, but Sansa saw it in her eyes. They held each other in a silent embrace, comforted only by the fact that at least they were together. That evening, a raven finally arrived from Robb. Catelyn's hands shook as she unrolled the parchment in the main hall, surrounded by Edmure and a few of his advisors. Sansa watched from a bench near the hearth, tense. Robb's words were concise but brimming with urgency. Mother, I've received your message about Lord Karstark. I fear it's worse than we knew. He has already clashed with some Lannister scouts near the Blackwater. Rumors say he captured 2 minor Lannister cousins and burned their camp, leaving no survivors. This act of brutality will only bolster Tywin's propaganda that we are rebels and murderers. I've sent outriders to locate Karstark and bring him to me, but the man moves swiftly and his hatred blinds him to reason. If I cannot rein him in, we risk Tywin's wrath on unsuspecting Riverlanders and the North itself. I must consider severe measures. If Karstark acts as a rogue, I may have to brand him traitor. But that will drive a wedge among the northern lords. A grievous choice, indeed. I do not know how else to contain him. Meanwhile, Tywin's men prepare. Marjorie Tyrell writes that she still seeks a settlement, but with each of Karstark's attacks, the Tyrells grow less inclined to believe we can maintain discipline. Our cause suffers. I will come to Riverrun soon if possible. We must strategize together, for the next blow is imminent. Pray for guidance from the old gods, Mother, for these times test me as never before. Robb. Catelyn lowered the letter, feeling a rush of dread. Karstark had indeed unleashed a storm of violence, and if it escalated, Tywin would have all the justification he needed to paint the North as savage usurpers. She shared the letter's contents with Edmure. He cursed softly, pacing. Sansa closed her eyes, sadness tightening her face. He captured Lannister kin, she murmured. Will they accuse us all of slaughter? I already see the city criers in King's Landing spewing lies. Catelyn nodded, frustration welling. Or worse, the Lannisters might retaliate by harming any Northerners they catch. Could it put Arya in danger if she's still somewhere in their grasp? Could it provoke an even harsher crackdown on the Riverlands? She glanced at Edmure. We can't let Karstark roam free, but we don't have the men to forcibly detain him. Not without undermining Robb's authority further. Edmure massaged his temples. Robb will have to handle it. But it might lead to a confrontation among our own. This is precisely what Tywin wants. Sansa lifted her gaze, voice trembling. Is there no path back from this brink? If Lord Karstark begs forgiveness, would Robb spare him? Catelyn sighed. Robb might, but Karstark's bloodlust runs too deep. If he's already burning camps and murdering prisoners, it's beyond negotiation. The realm's laws, Ned's own sense of justice, would demand punishment. A heavy silence fell. Catelyn reread Robb's words about Marjorie Tyrell. With Karstark rampaging, the Tyrells had a stronger case for refusing any peace that left the North unpunished. Another step toward a full-blown clash. She felt the pressure building like a kettle over a roaring fire, everything about to boil over. Before she slept that night, she knelt in the keep's small sept, trying to pray. She asked the mother for mercy, the warrior for guidance. She prayed for her children, for Sansa to heal from her wounds, for Arya to be found, for Bran and Rickon to remain safe, for Robb to carry this impossible weight without losing himself. Tears trickled down her cheeks as she whispered words into the stillness. The statues of the Seven seemed impassive, carved faces offering no sign. She rose, feeling no closer to clarity, only drained. At dawn, Riverrun stirred with fresh alarms. A group of disheveled refugees, half-starved, arrived at the gates from a hamlet near the Red Fork. They reported that a band of Sellswords, no one knew whose pay they took, had sacked their village, demanded gold, and torched half the dwellings. Some said the Sellswords wore Lannister colors. Others insisted they were mercenaries wearing mismatched gear. Either way, the small folk had nowhere else to go. Catelyn ordered that they be given shelter in the outer wards, at least temporarily. She assisted Sansa in distributing bread and water. The people eyed them with both gratitude and a lingering hopelessness. Children clung to their mothers, hollow-eyed from hunger and fear. Afterward, Sansa asked, voice quivering, does it ever end? Do we have to watch these horrors forever? Catelyn could only wrap her arms around her daughter and hold her close. We do what we can for them. That's all we can control. Some 2 days later, riders thundered into Riverrun's courtyard bearing the Stark banner. Catelyn rushed outside, her heart skipping. Robb, tall and broad-shouldered, dismounted with a weary grace. Grey wind prowled at his side, muzzle flecked with dust from the road. Behind him came a cluster of lords and knights, the great John among them, looking grim. Catelyn saw the tension in Robb's posture, the fatigue etched into his features. She hurried forward, ignoring protocol, and embraced her son. He stiffened slightly, then returned the hug, exhaling as though allowing himself a moment of vulnerability. You've come, she said, tears prickling. I prayed you would. Robb nodded. I had to. The situation grows dire, and I need to speak with you and Uncle Edmure. Also, Sansa, I need to see she's well after everything that happened. Catelyn beckoned. Sansa emerged from the shadow of a pillar, stepping forward tentatively. Robb went to her, pulling her into a careful embrace. She clung to him, tears in her eyes. Grey wind padded close, sniffing Sansa's gown, then nudged her hand, recalling her scent from Winterfell. Sansa let out a soft laugh, stroking the wolf's fur. The courtyard was crowded with men unloading supplies, stable boys leading the horses away. Robb turned back to his mother. Let's go inside. We have much to discuss. They convened in the great hall, Edmure hurriedly assembling key advisors. Sansa sat near the dais, while Robb took the seat of honor, his royal presence undeniable. He wore the Stark crown that had been forged for him, and though the lines of exhaustion were clear, he had the bearing of a king. He exchanged a few words with Edmure, then addressed the assembly. "I come with ill news," he began. "Lord Karstark has indeed gone rogue, attacking Lannister outposts and butchering captives. The stories grow uglier every day. Tywin's men call it northern savagery. This puts all of us at risk. If Tywin decides these raids justify a sweeping reprisal, he may ravage the Riverlands again. The alliances we rely on might crumble, seeing us as dishonorable." A low murmur spread through the hall. Catelyn watched the great Jon, who looked conflicted. Some among the northern bannermen believed wholeheartedly in vengeance, but not in savage killings of prisoners. Ned Stark had always upheld a code of honor. Karstark's methods violated that code. One lord asked if they could negotiate with Karstark, but Robb shook his head. "He refuses to come under my banner again unless we fully commit to an all-out assault on King's Landing. That is folly. Tywin wants us to do exactly that, so he can crush us in open ground." Edmure spoke quietly. "If we brand Karstark a traitor, we risk angering his house, which is still numerous in the north. Others might side with him." Robb's gaze flicked to Catelyn, then settled on the table. "I know, but Karstark has left me no choice. We can't let him ruin our cause with wanton slaughter. I have to take a stand. I will ride out, find him, and demand he cease or face the king's justice." The hall erupted in alarmed chatter. Catelyn stood, her heart pounding. "You plan to confront him in the field?" "Yes," Robb said resolutely. "We have a rough idea of his location near the lower Tumblestone. If I can intercept him with a sufficient force, maybe I can corner him before he wreaks more havoc. If he surrenders, we can hold a trial. If not," he trailed off, grimness in his eyes. Catelyn struggled with the implications. She pictured two northern forces clashing, brother against brother. It felt like a tragedy that would only strengthen the Lannisters' hand. But she saw no obvious alternative. Allowing Karstark to rampage unchecked would lead to the same ruin. She asked softly, "And if you must dole out the king's justice, will that not cause a rift with Karstark's kin at home?" Robb's jaw tightened. "It may, but I cannot let one man's quest for vengeance overshadow the North's honor." His eyes flickered with a memory of Ned's unwavering sense of duty. Father would have done the same, no matter how painful. Catelyn lowered her gaze. She recalled the day Ned had executed the deserter from the Night's Watch. He had taken no pleasure in it, but he had done it himself with his own sword, explaining to Robb and Bran that the man who passes the sentence should swing the blade. Now that terrible burden fell to Robb. There was no further debate that could change the core dilemma. Robb ended the meeting with a plan. He would gather a contingent of loyal northern men, among them the great Jon, Meej Mormont's warriors, and a few Riverlander knights, and march to intercept Karstark. Edmure would remain to defend Riverrun as well as look after Sansa and Catelyn. The separation weighed on all of them, but someone had to hold the stronghold. As the hall emptied, Robb caught Sansa's arm gently. "Walk with me," he said. Catelyn watched them go, noticing how Sansa looked both relieved to have her brother near and anxious about what he might say. They headed through a side door into the courtyard gardens. Brienne lingered at a distance, watchful but respectful. By the time Catelyn joined them, they stood among a cluster of autumn-browned rose bushes, the leaves falling around their feet. Sansa looked up at Robb, tears threatening. "Must there be more fighting?" she asked. "It feels endless." Robb sighed. "It does, but I have no choice. If we let Karstark keep killing prisoners, we lose all moral ground. We become the very thing we claim to oppose." Sansa nodded, hugging her elbows. "I wish you success. And I wish you'd stay safe." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I will. And I promise I'll see you again soon." They stood in a tight circle, mother, son, and daughter. Catelyn placed her hands on Robb's shoulders, feeling the tension under his muscles. "When do you ride?" "By dawn tomorrow," he said. "We can't delay. I only came here to gather men and rest the horses." Catelyn swallowed. "Then let us share dinner, at least, and talk a while. I suspect once you leave, we won't see you for many weeks." Robb's expression softened. "I'd like that." They returned to the keep for a private meal, joined by Edmure. The conversation hovered around old memories, the times at Winterfell, Sansa's early betrothal illusions, the pranks Arya used to pull, the cautious joy of Bran climbing the towers. It was painful, but also a balm to recall those days. Sansa managed a few soft laughs, though tears glimmered in her eyes. Robb recounted a snippet of a story about Arya besting some stable boy in swordplay. They all smiled, but the undercurrent of worry never vanished. When the meal ended, Robb embraced Sansa tightly, then turned to Catelyn. He placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Hold faith, mother. If all goes well, I'll put an end to this madness and return." She gripped his hand, fighting tears. "Be careful, Robb. And remember that your father's honor was tempered by compassion." If Karstark surrenders, well, do what's just, but do not let hatred blind you. He nodded. I promise. The next morning, he departed with nearly 400 riders, their banners rippling in the pale light. Catelyn stood on the battlements with Sansa, watching them until they vanished into the mist. Gray winds distant. Tiv Shape loped beside Robb's horse, a silent guardian. The emptiness that followed was almost suffocating. Catelyn recalled how many times she had watched loved ones ride off into the unknown, Ned on his journey south, Robb to his battles, now again. Each time, a piece of her heart was carried away. Sansa shivered. It feels like we're all scattered on different roads. I want us to be a family again. Catelyn wrapped an arm around her. Someday, dear heart. We must believe that. They retreated from the chill wind. A hush fell over Riverrun in the days following Robb's departure. The castle functioned as it always did. Sentries patrolled the walls, the blacksmith hammered metal, the kitchens prepared stews and bread, but an undercurrent of tension permeated everything. Catelyn sometimes walked along the tumblestone's edge, recalling her father's funeral boat, recalling the day she'd seen Ned's bones placed in a chest. It felt as if the realm had swallowed all her illusions of safety, leaving only heartbreak and battered resilience. Weeks stretched, and no new word came from Robb or from Karstark. Edmure's scouts roamed near the roads, but their reports were inconclusive. Some claimed Karstark's men had vanished into thick forests, others said he struck Lannister foraging parties along the southern trails. Meanwhile, Tywin's main host made no grand moves. It was as if the entire war hovered in suspense, waiting for a single spark that might reignite it. One chilly evening, a messenger arrived, haggard and half-frozen, claiming to bear news from Robb's camp. Catelyn had him brought inside at once. Gathered in the solar with Edmure and Sansa, she listened breathlessly to the man's tale. He was a simple outrider, tasked with slipping past any potential Lannister watchers to bring crucial tidings. King Robb found Karstark, the messenger said, voice still shaky from the cold. It was near an old crossing by the Green Apple Ford. Karstark had taken refuge in an abandoned holdfast with his men. The king demanded he cease his raids. Karstark refused. There was a confrontation. Catelyn clenched her fists. Did they fight? The messenger nodded. A brief one. It ended quickly. The king's force was larger. Karstark's men were outnumbered and some deserted him when they saw the royal banners. But Karstark himself, he tried to strike the king, calling him a traitor for not avenging his sons. Robb had no choice. He took Karstark prisoner. A hush gripped them. Sansa let out a trembling exhale. Edmure asked for more details. The messenger swallowed. Karstark was put under guard. King Robb said he would bring him to a field trial. The man spat curses at him, threatened the Starks, said the North would never forgive. It was dreadful. King Robb's bannermen insisted that Karstark must face justice for murdering innocents and defying the crown. Catelyn felt an ache in her chest. So he will be judged. Did the messenger see the outcome? No, my lady. I left as they were preparing the trial. But King Robb was determined. He said if Karstark was guilty, he'd pass the sentence himself. Sansa stared at the floor, face pale. Edmure released a slow breath. There it is then. Karstark's fate might be sealed. The question is what effect this will have on the rest of his house. Catelyn's thoughts churned. If Robb executed Lord Karstark, the man's kin might break away in fury. But if he showed leniency after Karstark's brutality, it would send a message that lawlessness was tolerated. She hated that her son had to make such a grim choice. She recalled Ned's stoic expression whenever he spoke of justice, how it pained him to wield the sword, but how he did it nonetheless. A day passed, then another, with no new raven. Tension rose. Catelyn tried to quell her impatience by helping Edmure with governance, but each passing hour felt heavier. Sansa spent much of her time either praying in the sept or assisting the healers. The entire castle seemed to brace for word from the king. Finally, near dusk on the second day, a raven arrived, sealed with the Stark sigil. Catelyn's heart lurched as she broke the wax. She scanned the lines, then read them aloud for Edmure and Sansa. Mother, it grieves me to inform you I have passed judgment upon Lord Rickard Karstark. He was found guilty of murdering prisoners of war and defying the crown's authority. He refused any chance for redemption, maintaining that I had failed him by not slaughtering every Lannister in existence. His hatred was a poison that threatened us all. I had no choice. I took his head myself, as father would have done. His men are in disarray. Some surrendered, others fled. A few remain sullen but resigned to my rule, though they will not forget this. I fear the Karstark family in the north will be outraged. We may lose their support unless we can mend the rift. Perhaps the younger heirs might be open to negotiation. I do not know. I will return to Riverrun soon, though I must first deal with the remnants of Karstark's force, ensuring they do not turn bandit or else join the Lannisters. This is a heavy burden upon me, Mother. I feel the weight of every life lost. Pray that this is the last time I must slay a Northern Lord. Robb. Catelyn lowered the letter, tears gathering in her eyes. Sansa's hand flew to her mouth, and Edmure closed his eyes briefly in mourning. The hall was silent except for the crackle of a nearby torch. Lord Rickard Karstark, once so proud, once a sworn ally of House Stark, was gone by Robb's own sword. The realm, already wounded, had suffered another mortal blow to its unity. Catelyn whispered a prayer for both Karstark's soul and for Robb's. The gravity of executing one's own bannerman was immense. She recalled how Ned had carried the memory of every execution he performed. Now Robb would carry that same burden. What effect would it have on his spirit? She prayed he would not grow cold and embittered. Sansa's voice broke the quiet. Will the Karstark men revolt? Catelyn inhaled slowly. Some might. Robb hopes to salvage the loyalty of the house, or at least keep them from open rebellion. But this is a deep wound. Edmure brushed a hand over his brow. And Tywin will see this as yet another weakness to exploit. He might lure the Karstarks with promises of land or vengeance. The war shifts yet again. They could do nothing now but wait for Robb's return. Catelyn told the scribes to pen a letter inviting any Karstark who felt aggrieved to come to Riverrun and parley, or at least voice their claims. Whether they would calm the storm, she did not know. At best, it might show that House Stark still sought unity. At worst, it might go ignored or provoke more resentment. In the following days, Catelyn found Sansa drifting like a ghost through the corridors, unsettled by the news. The girl confided that she kept remembering King Joffrey's sadism, how he would have taken pleasure in such violence. She feared that Robb would be labeled the same. Catelyn reassured her that there was a vast difference between cruel murder and solemn justice, but she understood Sansa's nightmares. War twisted every notion of right and wrong until they were nearly unrecognizable. Finally, after nearly a fortnight, horns announced Robb's approach once more. Catelyn and Edmure rushed to the courtyard, where they found the king in the north leading a smaller group than before. The Greyjohn was absent, presumably handling tasks elsewhere. Robb dismounted, eyes ringed with fatigue. Catelyn saw the hollowness behind his gaze. He looked older, worn beyond his years. Still, he stood straight, shoulders squared, as the assembled men bowed or knelt before him. Sansa hurried forward, and Robb offered her a faint smile, touching her shoulder. Then his gaze turned to his mother. "May we speak privately?" She took him to a smaller reception chamber. Sansa followed, reluctant to leave him alone, but he gave her a reassuring nod, promising to speak with her after. Once inside, Robb sagged onto a wooden bench, resting his elbows on his knees. Catelyn closed the door and stood before him. "Are you well?" she asked softly, though she could see the answer in his eyes. He let out a long breath. "I did what had to be done. Karstark spat at me, cursed my name, called me the boy king who fails his bannermen. Even as I raised the sword, he swore my doom. 'Kill me and be cursed, Robb Stark,' he shouted. Robb swallowed. But I swung the blade anyway." Catelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "You followed the law as Ned would have. I'm sorry it came to that." He nodded slowly, eyes distant. "It was an execution, not a murder. I keep telling myself that. Still, a part of me wonders if there was some other path." He closed his eyes briefly. "But no. He killed captives, Mother. That cannot be excused. Not in my name." Catelyn gently squeezed his shoulder. "You did right, or as right as one can in this brutal war." Robb sighed, straightening. "I've posted men to quell any Karstark loyalists who might turn outlaw. My bigger concern is how Tywin might exploit the fracturing of alliances. Word spreads that I've killed one of my own. Some lords in the north question if I'm still their king or if I've become as unyielding as the Lannisters." She moved to sit beside him, lacing her fingers together. "That may be so, but you still have many loyal allies. The Greyjohn, the Mormonts, the Tallhearts. And you have me and Sansa. We will do what we can to keep hearts steady." He managed a wan smile. "I appreciate that, though I feel as if each day another thread unravels. Tywin remains entrenched. Marjorie Tyrell continues to send letters about possible negotiations, but none of them address the real divide. She asks for further concessions, hostages. I can't yield to that, not after all this blood." Catelyn nodded. "And so we remain at a stalemate?" "Yes. A stalemate that bleeds our people. If Karstark's rebellion is contained, perhaps we can refocus on forging a stronger front. Or we move west, raid Lannister lands. I'm torn. Every choice has a cost." A sense of helplessness filled Catelyn. She placed an arm around her son, wishing she could shield him from all these impossible burdens. We will support you whatever path you choose. But remember that you are not alone in deciding. Call a council of your lords, weigh their counsel, and see if we might salvage something of a truce with Marjorie. Perhaps there's an angle we've missed. Robb nodded. I will. I'm tired, Mother. Tired of deciding who lives and who dies. Tired of seeing good men cut down. But the war isn't finished with us yet. They sat there in silence for a moment, mother and son, the hush broken only by the distant murmur of servants in the corridor. Finally, Robb stood, drawing in a breath. I'll speak with Sansa now. Then we should hold a gathering with Edmure and the rest. Time to see what can be done next. When he emerged from the chamber, Sansa stood waiting in the hallway, wringing her hands anxiously. Robb opened his arms and she stepped into his embrace. Catelyn watched as they exchanged quiet words of comfort. She saw Sansa's eyes fill with sorrow for him. Perhaps Catelyn thought that empathy could help Robb remember he was more than a warlord. He was a brother, a son, a protector of family. In the days that followed, Riverrun became a hive of consultations and war councils. Robb met with Edmure, the Great John, who returned with a handful of riders, Roose Bolton by Raven, and other lords who arrived to pay respects or share intelligence. They debated whether to march west into Lannister territory to attempt a new alliance with the Tyrells to push for Stannis' assistance in the south. None of the paths were easy. Meanwhile, Tywin seemed content to wait out the winter, certain the north would collapse from within. Sansa often observed these gatherings from the sidelines, quiet but watchful. Robb encouraged her presence, perhaps to remind the lords of what they fought for, the families shattered by the Lannisters' cruelty. She wore a humble gown, no jewels, her hair plainly braided, a subtle testament to the changed times, far from the glittering illusions of King's Landing. One afternoon, near the end of a lengthy meeting, a messenger approached with urgent steps. He handed Robb a sealed note bearing Marjorie Tyrell's sigil, the Golden Rose. Robb scanned it, brow furrowing, then read it aloud to the assembled lords. To King Robb Stark, I write with a final plea for reason. Our lines of negotiation have flagged, but I believe an opportunity arises with the approach of winter. Lord Tywin faces challenges in provisioning King's Landing if the war drags on. Tommen Baratheon's reign could benefit from a stable peace. I propose a parley at the border of the Westerlands, near the ruins of Ashmark, with a small retinue on each side. We will discuss mutual withdrawal, potential trade, and amnesty for certain loyal northern lords, minus those you have already punished. Should you refuse, Lord Tywin warns that he will press an offensive after the first snows, aiming to break your lines before you can fortify for the deep winter. I urge you to consider that neither side gains from prolonged bloodshed. I await your response. Marjorie Tyrell. The hall erupted in murmurs. Catelyn eyed Robb's expression, seeing the turmoil there. They had been down this road before. Tywin's peace demanded they bend in ways they refused. Yet the notion of meeting near Ashmark, once a seat of House Marbrand, was new. Could it be another trap? Or was Tywin truly concerned about supplies? Edmure, the Great John, and a few others argued that they could not trust Tywin. Bolton's letter indicated that Tywin's position in the capital was strong. Perhaps the supply issues were exaggerated. But if there was a chance, however slim, that it could avert more devastation, should they not try? Robb's gaze settled on his mother. What do you think? She considered carefully. I recall your father's counsel that even the wisest of lords sometimes must talk with the enemy. If we truly believe Tywin might budge, Edmure interrupted. We have no reason to believe that. Karstark's actions only gave him more reason to call us traitors. Catelyn raised a hand. True, but Marjorie might fear losing her influence if the war drags. The Tyrells do not want a devastated realm. They want prosperity. Perhaps she truly seeks a path that satisfies Tywin's pride while conceding us some freedom. Or perhaps it's a ruse. Without trying, we cannot know. The Great John grunted in approval. A parley is no surrender. We can always walk away if they demand our souls. Robb pressed his lips together. And if they strike at me during the parley? The Great John pounded a fist on the table. We'll bring men enough to deter any ambush. Let them try. Roose Bolton's voice on the matter arrived by Raven a day later, cautioning that Tywin's potential for treachery was high, but suggesting that refusing the parley might hand him the moral high ground. He will claim we spurned peace, Bolton wrote, and thus justify a new wave of war. In the end, Robb decided to accept the invitation with conditions: a strict limit on escorts, a designated neutral zone with watchers from both sides, and explicit terms that no weapon should be drawn. If Tywin or the Tyrells agreed to these conditions, the meeting would take place at Ashemark's perimeter in 1 month's time. Catelyn contributed to drafting the letter, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Sansa approached her afterward, asking whether she might attend. She said that Margaery had once treated her with kindness, that perhaps Sansa's presence could add impetus for a genuine peace. Catelyn was uncertain Sansa had endured too much risk already. But the girl insisted that if they truly wanted to show their sincerity, bringing the Lannisters' one-time captive might speak volumes. Robb hesitated as well, but in the end recognized the symbolism. "All right," he said, "but you will remain under heavy guard, Sansa. I won't risk your safety again." She agreed. The plan was set in motion. Letters passed swiftly, and eventually Margaery replied with cautious approval. Tywin, she claimed, would abide by these terms, though Catelyn's trust in Tywin's honor remained thin. Still, the realm braced for the possibility of a genuine negotiation. If it failed, war would resume in full. If it succeeded, perhaps some measure of respite could be found. In the weeks leading up to the parley, Robb's forces reorganized, fortifying the Riverlands while preparing a smaller contingent for the journey west. Men cleaned armor, sharpened swords, readied horses. Sansa spent hours with Catelyn, sorting out the practicalities of traveling into what was once Lannister-held land. Each night, Catelyn prayed that they would not be riding to their doom. On the appointed morning, the party set out from Riverrun. Robb wore simpler garb than usual, forgoing elaborate trappings of kingship but still carrying his crown packed in a saddlebag. The Great John accompanied him, as did several loyal lords and 200 knights, just enough to show strength without inviting open conflict. Sansa rode near her mother, flanked by Brienne and a few archers. They could not be too cautious. If Tywin had any plans of betrayal, they would at least be ready to fight their way out. The journey west took them through ravaged fields, abandoned hamlets, and the wreckage of once proud houses. The Lannisters had pillaged much of this region in earlier stages of the war, now it lay eerily quiet. Sansa shuddered at the burned-out shells of cottages, at the skeletal remains of scorched barns. War had a way of turning fertile land into a graveyard of ghosts. Catelyn felt a grim anger stirring each time she saw the Lannister sigil painted on a battered sign or a half-toppled statue. This was the cost of Tywin's ambition. As they approached the outskirts of Ashmark, they glimpsed the broken silhouette of the once formidable castle perched on a ridge. Smoke curled from a few torches in the yard, signs that someone had arrived. Robb's scouts reported that a Tyrell banner was visible, along with Lannister pennants. So Margaery and Tywin's people were indeed waiting. Catelyn's heart hammered at the prospect of meeting Tywin face to face, or at least being near him. That man was responsible for so much grief in her life. She prayed Robb could keep his composure if tension flared. They descended into the valley, the wind biting at their cloaks. The Watchers had chosen a flat expanse outside the castle ruins, with old stones marking the boundaries. Archers from both sides manned vantage points at equal distances. In the center stood a hastily erected tent of green and gold, the Tyrell colors, though a smaller Lannister flag flapped near it. Guards in Tyrell livery ringed the area, arms at the ready but not drawn. Robb signaled for his men to halt a short distance away. The Great John barked orders, ensuring their formation was neat and not overly threatening. Then Robb dismounted, assisted Catelyn and Sansa in doing the same. Brienne and a handful of knights followed close, protective. Slowly, they advanced toward the neutral tent. Catelyn's breath caught when she saw Margaery Tyrell step out. The young woman wore a flowing cloak trimmed in gold thread, her hair intricately braided. She offered a polite bow of the head to Robb, then an even gentler nod to Sansa. Beside her stood Ser Garland Tyrell, tall and serious-faced, and behind them was a small cluster of Tyrell retainers. But she saw no sign of Tywin Lannister himself. Instead, an older man in Lannister red, likely one of Tywin's bannermen or counselors, stood slightly behind Margaery. "Your Grace," Margaery said, voice carrying in the still air. "Thank you for coming." Robb inclined his head, face impassive. Lady Marjorie, we came in good faith as agreed. Marjorie gestured to the tent. Shall we speak inside, out of this chill wind? We have refreshments if you desire them. Robb cast a sideways glance at Catelyn. She gave a small nod, though caution pricked her nerves. They had to show willingness, so he gestured for a handful of his men to remain just outside. Very well. They stepped inside, finding a table set with chairs around it. Lip braziers provided warmth, and a few plates of fruit and bread were laid out. Marjorie took a seat, with Ser Garland on her right. The Lannister counselor, a man they later learned was Lord Kenning, settled on her left. Robb sat opposite, flanked by Catelyn and the Grey John. Sansa and Brienne stood slightly behind them, near the tent's entrance, watchful. Tension thrummed in the air. Marjorie folded her hands. It grieves me that we must meet under such dire circumstances. My family has no desire to see more blood spilled. I believe the crown feels similarly, though Lord Tywin is not here in person. He has entrusted me to speak on behalf of King Tommen. Robb's mouth pressed into a thin line. Then let us speak plainly. She nodded. Very well. The crown seeks an end to hostilities. The realm cannot endure another year of war. In exchange for recognition of Tommen's sovereignty over the south, the north would be granted wide autonomy. Trade routes would reopen and the horrors of raids on both sides would cease. Certain reparations might be discussed. The Great John rumbled, we've heard such words before. Always comes the catch, Tywin demands hostages or tries to punish our lords. Is that your demand now? Marjorie's expression tightened slightly. Yes, Lord Tywin insists on holding certain individuals accountable. He will not forget the death of King Joffrey nor the destruction wrought by northern armies. Yet we know the north has grievances as well, especially for what befell your father, Lady Sansa. She turned her gaze to Sansa, voice gentling. I am sorry for all you suffered. Sansa stared back, uncertain how to respond, so Robb answered. My sister's ordeal stands among many outrages. If Tywin truly seeks peace, he must abandon his talk of punishing northern lords en masse. Lord Kenning cleared his throat. We do not ask for en masse punishment, merely a token of good faith. Perhaps 1 or 2 ringleaders of the worst atrocities. That is no token, the Great John growled. You mean to demand we hand over men who fought for our lives, do you? Catelyn interjected quietly, the matter of accountability is fraught on both sides. We too might demand men who burned villages in the Riverlands. Yet that would lead nowhere but more resentment. Marjorie inclined her head. Precisely why we must find a compromise. Perhaps certain men can be exiled, never to trouble the crown or the north again. Or they might be placed in your own custody rather than Tywin's. We can find a middle ground if we strive in good faith. Robb's jaw worked. He glanced at Catelyn, who gave him a measured nod. Exile might be considered in some cases. But we will not deliver any man to Tywin's block. And we will not surrender our sovereignty. Marjorie looked relieved at even that tiny concession. Good. Then let us outline the specifics. King Tommen expects an acknowledgement of his rightful claim to the Iron Throne. The North remains free in practice, though the crown retains nominal overlordship purely symbolic for the sake of historical continuity. The Great John huffed. Symbolic, you say? And what if, in 2 years, the crown decides to enforce that overlordship? Marjorie's eyes flicked to Kenning. The older man answered stiffly, Tommen has no desire to rule the North directly. The Tyrells ensure the realm's stability. As you know, the Lannister name faces challenges. But if your rebellion remains on parchment alone, perhaps we can set it aside. Robb arched an eyebrow. You call it a rebellion, we call it independence. That alone may be irreconcilable. But for the sake of peace, we can consider a formal truce with certain assurances. We have demands as well, recognition of the North's authority over all its lands, including the Neck, full control of our own taxes, no presence of southern armies on our soil. Kenning frowned. This is extensive. I'm not certain Lord Tywin. Marjorie cut him off politely. We shall record these demands and see if Lord Tywin might yield given the stakes. War costs gold and the crown's coffers are taxed. He may be more flexible than you think, especially if the Tyrells stand behind these terms. Robb nodded. Good. Then let us also speak of the Riverlands. They have bled more than any region. We want a formal apology for the devastation and a commitment to rebuilding. Kenning bristled. An apology from the crown? That is no small request. The Great John snorted. A small price for all the villages they burned. Marjorie pressed her lips together and thought. We can discuss forms of compensation, grain shipments from the Reach, rebuilding funds from the crown's treasury. An explicit apology may be more delicate, but we can phrase it as a statement of regret for the violence inflicted. As they continued, Catelyn felt a flicker of hope. They were at least talking, acknowledging each other's points. But she remained cautious. This was only the beginning. Tywin still loomed behind the curtain, waiting to see if these negotiations served his interest. Marjorie might be earnest, but she was also cunning enough to shape events to the Tyrells' advantage. Hours passed. Scribes jotted notes. The tent grew stuffy from the brazier's heat. Sansa shifted on her feet, weary but determined to stay. Eventually, they took a short break. Servants brought watered wine and fresh fruit. Catelyn sipped, scanning the expressions of both sides. Marjorie was calm, Kenning was a bit flustered, Robb wore a guarded look, and the Greyjohn seemed restless. Progress was slow. She wondered if they'd emerge from this day with even a shred of consensus. At one point, Sansa timidly approached Marjorie, who had stepped aside to speak with Ser Garland. Catelyn hovered nearby, uneasy about letting Sansa move too close to the Tyrell circle. But Marjorie greeted her warmly, a small, apologetic smile on her lips. "Sansa," Marjorie said softly, "I'm so glad you made it safely out of King's Landing. I had hoped to help you more, but events spiraled quickly." Sansa nodded. "Thank you for what you did manage. I remember how you tried to shield me from Joffrey's rages in small ways. It mattered." A shadow crossed Marjorie's face. "I regret I couldn't do more. The city was a serpent's pit. Still is, in many ways. But now we have a chance to build a better realm. If your brother and Lord Tywin can find a compromise, Tommen might grow into a Kinder King." Sansa hesitated, then spoke earnestly. "I truly hope so. We've all lost so much. I just want peace." Marjorie's eyes flickered with sympathy. "As do I, my dear." They parted when Kenning called Marjorie back to the table. Sansa returned to Catelyn's side, expression thoughtful. "She seems genuine," she murmured. "But who knows how far Tywin's shadow extends." Catelyn laid a hand on her daughter's arm. "We keep our wits about us." At last, the parley resumed. Marjorie proposed a draft agreement that would be sent to King's Landing for Tywin's review. Robb and his advisors insisted on adding clauses that guaranteed no forced takeover of the North. Kenning interjected that some form of tribute might be expected in future years, if only to maintain the fiction of the crown's overlordship. The Greyjohn spat in disgust, but Robb managed to keep the conversation civil. Catelyn sensed that a precarious thread of possibility was being woven. It might snap at any time. As dusk approached, they reached a stopping point. Both sides agreed to let scribes finalize the day's notes. Marjorie, looking weary but poised, rose and dipped her head. "Your Grace, Lady Catelyn, we have made more progress than I dared hope. Let us retire for the evening. Tomorrow we can refine these proposals further." Robb inclined his head. "Agreed. Let there be no hostility in the night." Kenning stepped forward. "We have prepared a separate tent for you and your party, Your Grace. Our watchers will remain at a respectful distance, as promised. If you require anything, you may send a messenger." Robb nodded curtly. "We have our own supplies, but the courtesy is noted." They parted ways. The Stark contingent returned to their encampment a short ride away from the meeting site. Guards fanned out. Catelyn and Sansa found themselves in a modest command tent, side by side with their own bedrolls. Brienne stood guard at the entrance. The night air was cold, but the tension was colder. Sansa whispered her hopes that the parley might bear fruit, but Catelyn reminded her that Tywin still had to sign off. Even if Marjorie and Robb reached an accord, a single refusal from the Old Lion could shatter everything. They bedded down, the wind rattling the canvas, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow's negotiations might bring. Morning dawned gray and damp. A mist clung to the valley, giving the ruined castle of Ashmark an eerie silhouette. As the Stark party ate a sparse breakfast, a messenger came from Marjorie, inviting them to resume talks within the hour. Robb mustered his men, ensuring no suspicious movement from the Lannister or Tyrell watchers. Finding nothing amiss, they proceeded. Again, they gathered in the green and gold tent. Marjorie greeted them with a polite smile, though a flicker of worry crossed her eyes. Kenning stood behind her, looking stern. The discussion picked up where it left off, refining the terms of the proposed truce. Tempers flared at times, particularly when Kenning insisted that King Tommen deserved an annual tribute from the North. Robb refused outright. Marjorie gently tried to reframe it as a voluntary gift, but the Greyjohn roared that it was tribute by another name. By midday, they had hammered out a tentative compromise. The North would send a ceremonial gift at the start of each new king's reign, but no yearly obligations. Likewise, the The crown would not station any troops north of Moat Cailin without express invitation. Both sides would refrain from cross-border raids or support of each other's enemies. Finally, there remained the matter of so-called war criminals. Margaery pressed that Tywin insisted on a show of justice. Robb insisted that justice cut both ways. They were deep in debate when a commotion erupted outside. Shouts rang out, steel clashed. Everyone in the tent froze. Kenning half drew his sword. Margaery whirled, eyes wide. Robb vaulted to his feet, Catelyn and Sansa close behind, hearts pounding. The Great John stormed for the exit, roaring, "What is the meaning of this?" They spilled out of the tent to see men in Tyrell livery grappling with a group of riders that had just arrived, each wearing the colors of House Karstark. Catelyn's blood ran cold. The Karstark men brandished weapons, shouting that they came to see the traitor king. The watchers from both sides scrambled to intervene, preventing them from charging straight at Robb. Robb's voice thundered over the din. "Hold! In the name of the king in the north, lay down your arms." But the Karstark riders ignored him, eyes blazing with hatred. One of them cried out, "You killed our lord. We'll have your head, boy." Chaos descended. Tyrell guards tried to block the Karstarks. Stark knights rushed forward to protect Robb. Blades flashed, horses reared. Margaery gasped, stepping back, and Kenning barked orders for his men to stand down. But it was too late. The Karstarks had come for blood. Robb drew his sword. The Great John bellowed a war cry, meeting a Karstark rider with a clash of steel. A swirl of dust enveloped the area. Sansa clung to Catelyn, terrified. Margaery's retainers shouted for calm, but no one listened. A Karstark soldier tried to swing at Robb, only to be cut down by one of Robb's own guards. The man's blood sprayed across the muddy ground. Catelyn wrenched Sansa backward, pushing her behind Brienne. The tall warrior stepped in front, sword at the ready. Another Karstark rider veered toward them, brandishing an axe. Brienne struck with swift precision, parrying the blow and sending the man tumbling from his horse. He hit the ground, groaning, and Tyrell guards rushed to seize him. Margaery shrank back with Garland Tyrell, eyes wide in shock. This was exactly the sort of violent outburst that spelled disaster for any negotiation. Kenning cursed, struggling to keep his own men from retaliating. After a few chaotic moments, the Stark Knights managed to subdue or kill the intruders. 3 Karstark men lay dead, 2 wounded and captured. The rest retreated, galloping away beyond the Watchers' perimeter. The entire valley rang with the aftermath of screams and the labored breathing of horses. Robb, spattered with mud and blood, lowered his sword, chest heaving. "Search the perimeter. Make sure none remain to cause more trouble." The Great John clapped him on the shoulder, fury in his eyes. "Those bastards wanted your head. We should chase them down." Robb shook his head. "No, our agreement forbids unplanned aggression. Let them flee for now." Margaery, her face pale, came forward. "Your Grace, Lady Catelyn, Lady Sansa, are you hurt?" Catelyn shook her head, adrenaline thrumming. "No, thanks to Brienne." Sansa trembled, holding her mother's arm. Brienne stood at her side, sword still unsheathed, scanning for further threats. Margaery exhaled. "This is horrifying. I had no idea Karstark men would appear. They must have followed your trail." Kenning spat. "They nearly killed us all." The Great John glowered. "A handful of mad fools. We took them down." Robb looked at the corpses, jaw tightening. "This is the bitterness I feared. Karstark's death has made some men thirst for revenge. I'm sorry it spilled onto our parley. None of you were the target." Margaery nodded, though her expression remained shaken. "Still, it underscores how fragile peace can be. Lord Tywin will see this as yet another sign that you cannot control your bannermen." Robb's face flushed with anger. "They are no longer my bannermen. They are outlaws. If Tywin sees this as reason to escalate the war, so be it. They attacked me as well." Kenning exhaled in frustration. "I must send a raven to Lord Tywin reporting this incident." Robb's tone was sharp. "As will I." Let him know I condemned the attack immediately." With tension simmering, they returned to the tent, though the mood was irreparably changed. Blood stained the ground outside, and a hush descended on all. Marjorie tried to resume the negotiations, but the earlier sense of cautious optimism had fled. The Great John bristled at every mention of restricting northern movements. Kenning grew increasingly stiff, referencing the anarchy among the northern ranks. Robb looked ready to storm out more than once, but each time, Catelyn placed a hand on his arm, urging patience. By late afternoon, Marjorie, pale but composed, declared the day's session concluded. "We have done what we can. I will carry these proposals to Lord Tywin and the king. Yet after this unfortunate incident, I can promise nothing." Tensions run high. Robb dipped his head. "We appreciate your efforts, Lady Marjorie. I only regret that violence marred our meeting." Marjorie managed a small, sad smile. "We share that regret, Your Grace. May the gods grant us calmer days ahead." They filed out of the tent. The bodies of the fallen Karstarks had been moved aside, waiting for disposal. Sansa looked away, tears in her eyes. She saw the men's sunburst sigil on their cloaks, spattered with mud. These men once swore allegiance to House Stark. Now they lay dead at their own king's feet. The realm had truly devoured itself. That night, the Stark camp made preparations to leave at first light. Robb had no reason to linger at Ashmark if the negotiations were concluded. He posted double guards, wary of any lingering outlaws. Catelyn and Sansa tried to rest in their tent, but sleep came fitfully. Outside, the wind carried the smell of damp earth and old blood, an unsettling reminder that no matter how they tried to talk of peace, war was always close at hand. As dawn broke, they saddled up. Marjorie's messenger arrived with a polite note expressing thanks for the attempt at diplomacy and wishing them a safe journey. Robb dictated a similar note for her. Then, with the green and gold tent still standing as a lonely symbol of ephemeral hope, the king in the north led his people away, heading east toward the Riverlands once again. During the ride, Sansa rode beside her mother, silent for a long while. Finally, she murmured, "Every time it seems we might find peace, something shatters it." Catelyn sighed, adjusting the reins. "Yes. War feeds on old wounds. Karstark's men wanted revenge, not reason. Tywin will use that as fuel. All we can do is keep trying to hold our family together." Sansa blinked back tears. "I just want to go home." Home. The word stung Catelyn's heart. Winterfell was far away, and whether or not it was even standing in its old glory, she did not know. But she reached over, squeezing Sansa's hand lightly. "Someday," she said, though she felt the uncertainty like a cold weight in her gut. "Someday we will." The journey back was filled with a grim acceptance that the parley had yielded only a fragile set of proposals that might or might not persuade Tywin. Robb said little, haunted by the memory of the Karstark attack. Once they reached Riverrun again, they relayed the events to Edmure, who shook his head in resigned despair. The realm continued to unravel, piece by piece. In the weeks that followed, no raven came from King's Landing. Tywin offered no official response, leaving the Starks in uneasy limbo. Did that mean he was preparing an assault, or had he truly paused to consider the terms? Marjorie wrote one letter vaguely stating that she needed more time to convince certain parties. That was all. Meanwhile, winter crept closer. Frost dusted the fields, the nights grew longer, and Catelyn felt the chill in her bones. Amid the slow march of uncertain days, Sansa turned 16. The day passed quietly. Edmure ordered a modest feast in her honor, though the joy was muted by the war. Sansa wore a simple blue gown, her hair woven with a single ribbon. She smiled, but her eyes flicked often to Robb, to Catelyn, as though searching for reassurance. Catelyn kissed her daughter's brow, telling her she was proud of the strong young woman she had become. Sansa whispered her gratitude, though tears glistened at the corners of her eyes. That night, after the feast, Catelyn found Sansa alone in the Godwood courtyard, standing before a leafless weirwood that had been transplanted to Riverrun generations ago. Its trunk was white, its face carved in an old style, though not as ancient as Winterfell's heart tree. Sansa looked up at it, silent. When Catelyn approached, the girl spoke in a soft voice. "I keep thinking about Arya. If she's alive, if she's grown too. Does she still remember us? Bran, Rickon, have they changed as much as I have? The war separated us all." Catelyn's throat tightened. "I pray for them every day. We hold on to the hope that we will see them again." Sansa nodded.